I'm so glad to see you on my channel. The story begins with events taking place in 2308 BC, specifically on the red planet Mars. After the alien invasion, this place became the last line of defense for the people of Earth and Moon. But after 3 years, everything was supposed to end, because at that time a general offensive against the aliens on the defensive line of Mars was planned. The commander of the Earth Federation's Blood Wolf Squad, a colonel named Mo Feng, stared at the monitor, unable to comprehend what was happening. One of them was a man nicknamed Fatty, named Zhang Wu Lei. There were monsters outside and the enemy was already advancing faster and faster. These were aliens who had iron teeth and metal claws. People also used a variety of weapons against them and fired in their direction. The man only managed to dodge the enemy's powerful attack. The guy was very angry and even nuclear bombs were ineffective against these opponents. But when they first appeared, they could be killed even with ordinary rifles. After 3 years of war with these aliens, these creatures have developed resistance even to nuclear bombs. Half of Mars's defensive line has long been in the clutches of alien creatures. They even developed a counterattack method that brutally killed people, which was very creepy and sad. Well, the scariest thing is that there are several more new species ahead of them. Fatso aimed his weapon at 2 o'clock. In front of them were mutated species, 2 B-class aliens and 1 C-class alien. In order to completely eradicate humanity, the aliens evolved into mutants with extraordinary speed and strength. An orange alert level was declared, which scared the guys very much. When will the Luna Squadron arrive? In the face of these strange creatures, human superiority has completely vanished. Terrible things happened and monsters killed people one after another. The guy holding the powerful weapon asked his people not to panic. He explained that he would take on these 3 mutants and asked the fat man to reorganize the front. He will leave the defense of this place to him, and the guy went towards danger. He was already approaching the huge metal monsters that rang with their cold and power. The guy approached one of them whose paw had huge iron claws. He tried to resist when the monster opened its mouth and green tongues of flame began to come out. The guys tried to dodge, and the guy took aim. No matter how much they evolved, their attacks would be completely useless against him. The boy did not give up and continued to fight these monsters, dealing more blows. He asked them not to even think about it, because he had to detain the strangers. He needed to buy the fat man enough time. The boy told the commander that the time had already come and where the hell was that damned Moon Sister squad? The boy exclaimed sadly that their people were dying. The time for a general offensive has already come. And why has not a single ship from the Lunar Squadron appeared yet? The command center was asked if they had been intercepted by alien forces. The local General Offensive Command Center is the Lunar Federation. The Blood Wolf Squad leader is calling the command center. This went on for a very long time and the guy kept trying to call the command center. And finally the connection was established, but the man heard some kind of terrible scream. He realized that the people of the moon were in danger and that the Lunar Federation had no more forces left for reinforcements. If this continues, nothing good will come of it, and it will be the end of them. The boy decided that it looked like he would have to look for a wife in his next life. The boy told the commander that it looked like he would have to go first. He apologized for holding them back all these years and for coming under heavy enemy attack. The commander turned towards him and screamed in horror, as his comrade had already fallen. The monsters were approaching faster and faster and surrounded them from all sides. The man remembered his parents and little sister. He opened a small amulet with photographs and looked at them. He looked closely at his family and said that he would finally be able to free himself. He was completely surrounded by monsters that were approaching him from all sides, faster and faster. The boy was ready to die and, closing his eyes, pressed the amulet to his chest. He told his family that he would come to them now, and a powerful pillar of fire rose up. There was a powerful bright flash and fiery golden rays rose higher and higher. The planets began to revolve around these rays and a white haze began to envelop him. It was as if he had turned into this white haze and began to reincarnate and dissolve into the planet. He thought blowing himself up would be much more painful. Now he feels so languid and doesn't want to get up. The boy smelled some unusual odor and exclaimed that he hadn't smelled such a stench for a long time. Where did the dirty sock come from in front of him? And in this case, it is not surprising that it smelled so strongly. In front of him was a fat man who laughed and said that his invincible smelly socks were simply amazing. Then the guy told his brother not to get so angry, because it was just a joke. He approached the fat man and asked if they were still alive. The fat man was very surprised and asked what that look was. Why was he so mad? A sock kick couldn't have hurt that much. But before he could finish speaking, the boy started tugging at his cheek. Then the fat man asked what nonsense he was talking about and, of course, if he was alive. Then the boy threw himself into the fat man's arms. The fat man asked what was really going on with him, and, even if he was desperate, to remember that there were still plenty of fish in the sea. He asked his brother to let him go, and he said that even if he was unlucky in love, he couldn't help it, because he was going to marry only the girl. The boy realized this must be reincarnation or time travel. The fat man started running away from his friend and asked them not to look for him. The main character was in front of the computer and looked closely at the monitor. He certainly didn't expect this. And did he really go back 8 years? The boy decided that since he had been transported back 8 years, then why did his head hurt so much, and could it really be because of the explosion? A girl appeared before him and apologized, explaining that she wasn't interested in seniors like that. The fat man asked his brother not to drink so much just because he'd been rejected. But why did he return exactly after this event? If he really did travel back 8 years, then his little sister and his parents should still be alive. The boy clenched his fists, thought for a moment, and decided, looking at the table, that he urgently needed a mobile phone. He started rummaging around the room and, turning over his pillow, finally found his mobile phone. The main character immediately took the phone in his hands and looked at the photograph that was depicted on it. Mofeng tried to calm himself down and decided he simply had to call them. He was in great pain, but he tried to calm himself down. After all, he had put in too much effort and was not yet used to his new body. The boy tried to concentrate again and approached his mobile phone. He dialed a certain number and with tears in his eyes began calling his sister. On the other end of the line, he really heard his sister Xiaoling's voice. Was she really alive? Which meant his parents were alive too. The sister asked her brother not to be so upset. Although it might sound a little harsh, since he is the closest person to her, she had to say it. Sister Zichen and he are not compatible at all. The girl explained that she and Sister Zichen were members of the Federation Genius Club, so she would tell him as it was. The girl continued to explain to her brother that he was certainly a good guy, but Sister Zichen was not for him. The fat man looked into the room and noticed that his brother was so unhappy after failing in love, and now his own sister was finishing him off. And it was very cruel. Mo Feng replied to his sister that he was very happy to hear her voice and thought he would return home this weekend. Xiaoling exclaimed that he finally understood. She had one more thing to tell him, and the main reason his sister didn't like him was because he lived with that fucking fat man. He'd better get rid of him soon because just looking at his fat face makes him want to punch him. The fat man immediately became sad when he heard this. The main character listened to his sister, and he was not very pleased to hear it. But suddenly he closed his eyes and exclaimed that her brother would always love her. But the girl answered her brother that he didn't need to explain and immediately became thoughtful. She grabbed her cheeks with her hands and decided that this was a nervous breakdown, and right in broad daylight. He just said he liked Xiaoling's sister. Well, she hadn't heard her brother say something so stupid in a long time. He seemed completely different to her. She hoped he wasn't saying that because he was about to do something stupid. The girl raised her head and, looking forward, could not understand what was happening to her brother. She prayed to the Lord, not understanding what had happened to him and what his thoughts were. The girl told Zhou Zichen that if her brother got involved in anything bad, she would haunt him forever. Although it's unlikely anything serious will happen, and given her brother's obtuse nature, the most he'll do is get completely wasted. The current curriculum is a bit challenging, and that old pervert, Professor Maurice, asks a lot of questions. In fact, it would have been even better if Sister Zichen had become her daughter-in-law, but alas, her older brother is a real pain in the ass. If he had been smarter, that would have been a different matter. The boy sat with his phone in his hands and, smiling, thanked his sister. He said that now he would definitely be able to call them. The main character dialed his father's phone number, and he immediately answered. He asked why he'd called home so suddenly, thinking he was having trouble with his studies. Mo Feng replied that wasn't the case at all, and that he simply missed him and his mother. My father said that if he was bored, he should come home for dinner this weekend and remember to study hard. My mother asked me not to worry about studying alone, and that there were plenty of other girls at their school. The girls at the military academy are all very pretty, both in appearance and in figure. Just remember the fat guy from Auntie Zhang's family who brought one home last summer. The mother asked her son when he would bring a girl home and maybe try to do it this year. The father asked his son not to listen to his mother because real men should strive for all sides and accomplish great military deeds. The mother asked her husband to be quiet and asked if the retired commander of a small cook detachment had really decided to rebel. Then the father also said goodbye to his son and said they would talk another time. He asked him to study hard and come home on weekends. His dad would cook his favorite stewed fish, and he wished him luck and hung up. The boy listened to the beeps coming from his phone. He thought about how, When he used to talk to them, he always wanted to hang up as quickly as possible. But now he really wanted to keep talking to them and hear their voices. Meanwhile, the fat man was sitting at his desk, humming something with his diary open. The boy looked at him carefully and thought about something while looking at the fat man. It's hard to believe that this fat man will become his most skilled marksman in the future, who will accompany him on the battlefield of Mars until his death. There must be some way to prevent that devastating disaster. There definitely must be some way. Otherwise, why could he even come back? And why does he now know things he didn't know in the past? Now in this 20-year-old body, there is a fully matured, unbending soldier, and he will definitely be able to do anything. But first, it would be nice to fill his stomach, and the boy decided to go eat. Meanwhile, the fat man was lying on his bed, hugging his food and blowing bubbles. The protagonist, in turn, thought about how only after hearing the voices of his loved ones did he feel so energetic that he completely lost the desire to sleep. The boy looked out the window and noticed that it was an unusually quiet night. In just 5 years, such a tender night will no longer exist in this world. 5 years later, the Earth-Moon system was attacked by aliens disguised as comets. Several important cities on Earth and the Moon suffered a powerful, crushing blow. People were too careless. Although they fantasized about the existence of aliens, they never expected that aliens would actually appear in the heavenly realms. Humanity began to resist fiercely, and in the first days of the war, both sides exchanged pleasantries, and humans even gained the upper hand. The Battle of Syrtis Planum was a turning point and became key in the battle for Mars. Due to human carelessness, the northern part of Mars was occupied by aliens, after which the battles for Mars did not stop for 3 years. Over these 3 years, the aliens grew stronger and stronger. They became more numerous, huge, and vicious. As a result, after the defeat at the Solar Lake, people lost control of Mars and went from an offensive to a full-scale defense. Although he doesn't know what the plan of the top was before the last battle, the situation was such that all of humanity was on the brink of destruction. 2 key nodes were destroyed by comets, preventing the human coalition from taking action in time and losing several important strongholds. Moreover, the aliens seem to be able to miraculously foresee the course of major battles. But scientists have discovered that humans are unable to communicate with them. Is it possible that aliens also have supernatural abilities, like his sudden return through time? But this phase of the Moon people is somehow strange, and could they be traitors? Everything must have a reason, and if the Moon people are truly traitors, what is their motive? Capitulation to an alien. But this is impossible because, after the aliens' complete victory, humans would at best become their food. Moreover, as it turns out, the aliens cannot communicate with humans, so how then did they learn their secrets? During the war, 70% of the battle credits belonged to Luna. Although people complained about the inability of the lunar sister, they did so only to vent their anger. These assumptions of his are of little use now, and he did not belong to the top management, so most of the information was out of his reach. Because of this, he could easily make mistakes. Even though he's returned to the past, he can't do anything right now. Still, if he starts shouting everywhere that he's from the future and they're facing an alien invasion, they'll just send him to a psychiatric hospital. However, the thing is that there is most likely some problem inside people. If he leaves everything as it is, he will meet his death again. What if he too became a member of the top management? Such an intriguing thought occurred to the protagonist. During his military school years in the past, his grades were too mediocre, so he missed out on a lot of opportunities. However, this time things are different, and if everything works out, he will be able to join the top management and gain the right to influence decision-making. Perhaps he will be the key to solving the problem. Only the very best elite of military academies attend the competitions, not to mention those who show excellent results there. But the most important thing is that because of the war, 5 years later, the students who showed outstanding results in this city became the main forces of the army of the Earth and the Moon. The boy decided this was his chance. Recklessness and fun wouldn't solve his problems, and he had to be calm, serious, and even patient. Meanwhile, the guys who were in the audience looked at the fat man and the girl who was sitting next to him. They were clearly jealous of him as she clung to him and called him Brother Lay. Then the fat man found himself in the room next to the girl he hugged. Suddenly, she started to push away and asked her brother to wait a little. He wanted to hug the girl again, but suddenly their gaze fell on the window from which eerie red eyes were looking at them. A huge, sinister wolf with creepy hands instead of paws began to burst through the window into their room. Lay started screaming when he grabbed the girl and she asked him to help him quickly. This evil monster started to fight and knocked the fat man over with his foot, causing him to fall on his back. The guy asked where the werewolf came from and asked the girl not to be afraid, as he would save her. The monster continued to hold the girl and began to carry her away through the window. The guy asked the monster not to even think about running and rushed after him. He begged Lulu to return it and threw himself into the monster's hand. The girl began calling out to the boy. He grabbed the evil monster and began to tear at its arm, pushing it away from Lulu. The guy couldn't understand who it was and realized that it was not a monster but a water spirit. When the fat man woke up, he was simply terrified and beads of sweat were running down his face. He did not expect such a terrible, scary, and disturbing dream, and his gaze fell on his comrade. The main character also looked at the fat man, and he was completely drenched in streams of sweat. Lei looked at Mo Feng with fear and exclaimed with horror in his eyes that he had become a water spirit. The main character approached the boy and asked his brother if he had drowned himself. The fat man started shouting that now his ghost had come to him and why did he have to do this because of some woman. Mo Feng told the boy to calm down and asked if he'd had a nightmare. He'd simply decided to practice. After all, a future soldier can't afford to be lazy. Lei asked his comrade if everything was okay and said he had just sounded exactly like their instructor. Mo Feng reflected that failure in love really does seem like a serious matter when you're young. Even though it's his body, every aspect of it has ultimately changed dramatically. The potential of this body is actually quite good, but it will take more time to adapt. If you compare the use of genetic power and the conditions on Mars to those here, the difference is truly like night and day. To have a better chance of surviving on the battlefield, you need to work harder in training. But hardly anyone thinks about such things in such peaceful times. Only those who have survived a real hell can understand this, and even a little more strength and skill could help save their lives. In fact, his comrade Zhang W.K. Lei is also very talented. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived until the final battle. He just doesn't realize it yet. The boy chuckled and decided that if hatred had kept him going in battle, then what had motivated his comrade to go all the way? The boy shouted after his comrade, telling him not to be so upset and that the best was still ahead. Lei thought about how Mo Feng's brother had been rejected and must be trying to suppress his pain with training. He sighed and decided that this was why his Lulu was the best, and she would never cause so much trouble. Thinking about this, Lei decided he needed a snack. He wanted to eat well and asked his companion to turn his bitterness and resentment into a desire to eat. Mo Feng said that he would take a shower for now, tidy himself up and come back. Could he have guessed earlier that it must have been food that supported him in battles? Matt Snow has completed 5 triathlons and a 10-kilometer cross-country race. When he reaches his peak, it will be a piece of cake. He's now about 50% recovered, and his body should be better and more resilient. It's just that genetic strength needs further training and willpower. He had this mysterious feeling during the war against the aliens. In this era, genetically modified soldiers and genetic engineering are not taboo, so no one is horrified at the mention of it. Initially, in order to colonize Mars and the Moon, scientists began conducting research on reconfiguring human genes. Ultimately, these studies made such a huge breakthrough that they solved not only the problems of adaptation to an alien environment. Moreover, they initially expanded the entire potential of humanity. Genetic technologies have truly moved human exploration of the Moon from aspiration to reality, laying the foundation for rapid and exponential development on the Moon. But they have also created friction between Earth and the Moon. The Earth Federation had a somewhat conservative approach to genetic engineering and leaned more toward natural human evolution. They believed that more time was needed to achieve the goal of fully adapting humans to interstellar travel. The Moon people, on the other hand, took more radical action, as the harsh environmental conditions dictated the need for more intensive genetic modification. Although direct genetic modification has brought benefits such as increased IQ and adaptability, but it also caused some physical and mental disabilities, which have given rise to huge controversy. Human heredity, the survival of the fittest, eliminated these defects, thus forming the currently living people of the Moon. In essence, the goals of the Moon and the Earth were the same. Only the processes of achieving them were warm for some and hot for others, hence such a relationship between the Earth and the Moon. Being competitors, at the same time they are inextricably linked in science, economics, military affairs, and other areas. His physical condition will be much better by the time of war. The main thing is to let his body get used to his genetic strength. The method for this is quite simple. Train until your heart rate drops. Exhaustion and overuse are the easiest way for the body to adapt. Both the Earth and Lunar Federations place great importance on military academies, so living conditions there often surprise newcomers. The most fundamental evaluation criterion is genetic merit. Simply put, military academies are places where officers are trained, especially those with strong genetic backgrounds. The higher the genetic value, the stronger the adaptability to harsh conditions, the standard of admission to military schools. Of course, this value does not directly indicate combat effectiveness, and it only reflects a kind of potential, the maximum that a person can ultimately achieve. The main character looked at the fat man and said that they should quickly go eat. Although he remembers that the food at the military school was quite varied, it is surprising that the fat man never said a word about the menu. He remarked that for some reason he kept feeling different today. Mofeng decided that his comrade's skills were beginning to awaken. His intuition and marksmanship during the war were truly astounding. He asked what exactly was different from the norm. The fat man pointed at his smile and exclaimed that that was it. Mofeng couldn't say for sure what had changed. Perhaps he'd become more handsome or something. Lei exclaimed that his compliments didn't make him happy at all. What was the point of calling another guy handsome? One of the kids asked if this was the guy, pointing to the main character, who had confessed to the most beautiful girl in school and been rejected. The other replied that it really was him, and the fat idiot next to him. But it was truly foolish to dare to confess to Sister Zichen in front of everyone. The guys kept pointing at the boy and saying that he was the one who publicly confessed to being the most beautiful girl in the school and failed. For some reason, this guy's enthusiasm probably completely disappeared after that. The guys were sitting at a table and the fat man suddenly grabbed his head with his hand and blushed, after which he said that young people these days do not respect their elders at all. They continued chatting, and the students around them pointed at the boy and laughed. The fat man exclaimed that Mo Feng had brought glory to their class, and rumors about him had already spread throughout the school. The headman appeared in front of the boys, and Lei smiled and immediately greeted her. This is Sun Xiaorui, a close friend of hers and the fat man's in military school. She was also their class president for 4 years. After graduation, she quickly rose through the ranks of the military and the war against the aliens. The girl became one of the youngest captains of a large spaceship. For the first few years, she and the fat man were at the very bottom of the army, but this did not stop her from continuing to communicate with them. It's a pity. But it seems the heavens themselves were jealous of her talent, because in the battle at the Solar Lake, the space fleet of the Earth Federation was almost completely destroyed. Sun Xiaorui eventually fell in that battle as well. Suddenly, the girl approached the protagonist and asked why he was staring so wide-eyed, as she was right. She came closer to him and said that she just wanted to look at him, and was he really so eager to disgrace them in front of the whole school? Mo Feng said the village chief was right, and he had truly distinguished himself. Fatso agreed, adding that he'd already been laughed at enough and thought he'd fully realized his mistake and thought it through. The village headman asked how well he'd thought it all through. He asked if he'd treat them to 3 full meals. Lei raised his hand and exclaimed that he would wash his socks for a whole week. The main character immediately asked him to stop and asked whether they had come to console him or to finish him off. The village headman explained that she had initially wanted to console him, but seeing his smiling face, she decided it was pointless. Was he planning to die from his emotional wounds? Lei asked his friend what the password was for his bank card. He explained that he would take care of it for him. Mo Feng thought that in the past, at this stage, he had indeed suffered a serious injury and his stupidity had caused a lot of trouble for both himself and his friends. The fact that he fell into depression because of Zhou Zi now seems truly absurd to him. This time he feels wonderful, and it's a completely new experience. The food truly tastes delicious, and only those who've been through the war know how pleasant it is to eat in peace and quiet. Although there were no supply problems, moments when they could eat without worrying about a sudden alien attack were rare. But later the quality of food still became worse and worse, and there is no comparison with food in peacetime. Now it was delicious and aromatic, and the boy answered his friend that he didn't have a bank card, and the pile of socks and underwear could be left lying around in the dorm. The class monitor asked if they should focus on their 3rd year instead of worrying about girls. They should focus more on their grades. The fat man asked what difference it made, since all graduates were the same, and the stamp on their diploma wouldn't make much of a difference. In fact, he greatly admired Brother Feng and couldn't care less about the results. The boy raised his hand and asked the others to forget about it as soon as possible. She got angry and exclaimed that it would be better for them not to be so indifferent, and that the stamps on their certificates would determine where they would start after joining the army. If they don't try now, they'll have to put in 10 or 100 times more effort later. Lei exclaimed that they had a very caring headman, and that was wonderful. The girl said that of course she was already aiming for the Iron Eagle fleet. So if they got there too, she would be able to take care of them for the rest of her life. The fat man exclaimed when he heard about the Iron Eagle. She must be joking. These are the ace troops, and if he and his comrade don't score 1,200 points, they won't even be allowed to clean toilets. The head girl exclaimed that everything was fine and asked how many points they both had now. If they have more than 700, then they need to work hard on these days, and she has passed several tests, so she will be able to train them in these tests. They need to strive to score 800 points, and if they can qualify for the elite competition, it doesn't matter whether they win or lose, it will still improve their certificate, and then they can get into the troops they need. The fat man exclaimed, hugging Mo Feng, that the weather was fine today. The protagonist remarked that the village chief was right, and, although he was a bit short of his goal, he would definitely try to make it to the competition. The girl exclaimed that this was how it should be, and that he was a good man, that relationships were very important, and she asked what about the fat man. Then the guy, washing down his food with juice, coughed a little and replied that he would of course try. The boy asked with a smile on his lips how much time was left until the competition. The head woman answered the boys that they were only just over a month away. The girl remembered that when she first sat down, his plate was full, and he also took the largest portion for real gluttons. There were 5 whole wheat loaves of bread weighing 250 grams, and during that time, while they were chatting for a few minutes, the plate was completely empty. The guy started to get up from his chair and said that he would go get more. Mo Feng thought that high-intensity training required a large amount of calories. It is not enough to just eat your fill. You also need to fill your stomach with reserves. The main character smiled and exclaimed that now everything is very good, very tasty, and satisfying, and great that there is no war. The boy asked why they were looking at him like that and whether they weren't going to eat. The village head woman said she was already full, watching him eat, and asked how much he had eaten. She couldn't understand how he could eat so much so quickly. Lei said that Brother Feng had indeed turned his emotions into a desire to eat and limited himself to just food. How awful. He'd wanted to help, but ended up teaching his brother to eat away his sorrows. He asked the boy to hang in there because the best was yet to come, and sooner or later he'd find a girlfriend. The headmistress advised him not to drown his sorrows in food, and that studying would give him more strength. The most important thing now is to gain experience, and men need to be strong. Mo Feng decided they'd misunderstood him again, and that failure in love was leading to increased appetite. Before us is the women's dormitory, the Dragon Letters School, which towered up to the sky. The class president straightened up and, exhaling, exclaimed that she had finally made up her mind. The girl asked Xiao Rui if she had chosen too many subjects. Xiao Rui approached her and said that she took everything related to the fleet. She asked her friend to choose the same course and said that in the future, when she became a ship captain, she would take her under her wing. The girl replied that she shouldn't and that the courses would be too difficult for her. She no longer enjoys the navigator's course, and who knows, maybe she'll take her under her wing in the future. Xiao Rui mentioned that she'll need her chosen course too. She's actually curious about what courses Mo Feng and the fat man chose. She'll have to keep a close eye on them this year. In front of us is also the men's dormitory of the Dragon Letters School. The guy was surprised when he heard about the rear service and said he chose the dead subjects. But shouldn't his passion be the same as his beloved goddesses? A shooting course. That's what he should choose. The protagonist tried to explain to the fat man that they would be participating in the EM. They would have to complete several practical courses. Lei told his brother that he must not be serious because two such talentless people like them and EM are simply incompatible. Mo Feng exclaimed that he was serious and that they still had almost a month left. If he could get 800 points, then he could do it too. The fat man clutched his cheek thoughtfully and said he couldn't. The boy wondered if he'd really discovered them and whether he'd certainly hidden them well. He exclaimed that he didn't care, and if he had less than 800 points by the time of registration, he would put his figures on Bao Tao, so everything depended on him. The fat man asked how long he'd been lusting after his Lulu. Even if he'd been rejected, he couldn't just take her away from him. The guy decided when the main character ran out of the room that it seemed like this had a strong impact on Brother Feng's psyche, and that he had previously despised EM, but now he had completely lost his humanity. The fat man smiled and said that it looked like his love wouldn't hear him reading a book on the basic laws of jump curvature, but it would be better for his Lulu. There's just over a month left until the EM registration deadline, and that's definitely enough for him. The protagonist clenched his fists and decided that genetic power exists in every person's body. The correct method of control is the main key to unlocking it. Knowing this, he can become the strongest man of this era. He must reach the peak state of his body before the aliens arrive. He must transcend even the limits of his past life. 5 days later, dragon letters appeared at the school's sports stadium. The protagonist was confident and serious about sports. The class leader remarked that he was actually quite good and now seemed like a completely different person. The fat man replied that he felt very sorry for him. He clearly had severe broken heart syndrome, and the guy continued to train tirelessly. He used reflex training, running, and muscle training. And for several days now, all he has done is train, eat, and sleep. Lei covered his face with his hand and exclaimed that love had ruined Brother Feng, and he had never been like this before. Xiaorui turned to the boy and said that he had only gotten better, and it was long overdue. Lei shouldn't lag behind him either. But when he mentioned his chips, the girl immediately threw them in the trash can and said that now he had to go train with his brother Feng immediately. The boy grabbed his head and exclaimed that he had over 700 points and why should he train anymore? The class monitor asked him what he was mumbling and, clenching her fists, asked him to run quickly and train. The fat man immediately hurried over and asked his comrade to wait for him. Mo Feng was glad that Lei had finally arrived. He asked him to keep in mind that if he beat him by a full lap, he would sell the poster of his goddess. Then the fat man started running faster and asked his friend not to. The headmistress noticed how energetic they were, and it was really nice to watch them try so hard. That same evening, the protagonist was training in the hall of the dragon riding school. He thought about how the fat man was still too weak. He'd collapsed after just 10 laps. Lei said he couldn't take it anymore and needed to crawl home because he wanted to see the cosmic beauty. The boy thought that they were both 20 years old now, and that was about the age when it was easiest to master genetic power. It's only been 5 days, but he already feels fully recovered and can't wait to test his strength. He absolutely needs to reach 800 EM points, and he currently only has just over 350. Although the number of points does not reflect real combat effectiveness, society needs some kind of certification system. He'd missed out on a lot in the past due to his waywardness, but that wouldn't happen again. It was time to head to the EM building for some real practice. Before us is the educational building of the School of Dragon Letters. Advanced training for EM will begin soon. Students were asked to head to their respective zones, and those with an EM score of less than 500 points would undergo basic training. The main character smiled and exclaimed that this evening he would show what he had achieved. The system asked to use the celestial information to register in the EM system and thanked for its cooperation. The registration was successful and Mo Feng's result is much below average, so he needs to work harder. The boy said that his results would be above average this evening, but he just had to wait. Suddenly, he heard the girl ask the older man to let her go. Mo Feng saw Zhou Zichen in front of him and was very surprised how she ended up there. The guy held the girl's hand and asked her not to be so cold to him by calling her Junior Zichen. The girl told the elder Li William that she had already asked him to let her go. Mo Feng, looking at them, decided that the world really was a small place. The girl saw the boy and gave him a surprised look. If he remembers correctly, Li William was in the top 5 at EM. His father is a member of parliament, and the family has vast assets, making him the epitome of a tall, rich, and handsome man. He felt a little sad and thought that it would be better for him not to stay here for long. Unexpectedly, the girl told the elder William that the thing was that she already liked Mo Feng. That's why she apologizes to him and doesn't want her boyfriend to misunderstand her. William didn't expect this and wondered if this fool was really her boyfriend, considering it a joke. William replied that he knew the younger Mo Feng and asked him not to try to use him as a shield, because everyone already knew what he had done a few days ago. Zichen told the elder, so he doesn't know everything, and that time she didn't reject him, she just didn't like the way he confessed. Where had you ever seen a guy strip naked in a public confession, instead of at least giving her flowers? Mo Feng was very surprised because she actually blushed. He wondered why he had never seen her like this before, and suddenly he felt that he had not lived in vain by removing the hand of this scoundrel. He explained to the elder William that beautiful girls didn't like being pushed too much and that he wasn't being gentlemanly when he crossed the line, not to mention that Zichen was his girlfriend. Even if that weren't true, shouldn't he reflect on his behavior? She wondered if he had really been so eloquent. One of the guys exclaimed that this is how it should be done with this boor, and it was simply amazing. Mo Feng was called handsome, and William decided that there were too many people here and he would not get into a fight. He looked menacingly at the main character and said through gritted teeth that he remembered him. He turned to the girl and said that he still believed that she would ultimately make the right choice. The kids around them decided to go have dinner, and the others were also talking about going to their rooms. Someone exclaimed that the weather outside was simply gorgeous. Zikin pressed herself against the boy and then said that it was time to let her go. And why does such a talented girl like Mo Xiaoxing have such a cheeky and stupid older brother? The thief blushed slightly and smelled the pleasant scent of her hair and body. She blushed, and he got the most out of it. He had never stood so close to her before. Zikin stared at him and thanked him for helping her out just now. She wanted to continue, but Mo Feng stopped her and asked her not to thank her, because he understood everything, and it was not difficult for him to be an excuse. And at least he was able to stand so close to such a beauty. So if in the future he needs to do something similar again, he asks to call him, and he will be happy to help. He thought that returning to the topic this evening, he still had to see what assessment the EM system would give him for his new powers. When the war began, the EM system ceased to be used, so most likely today he will be able to find out what results he could have achieved with it then. In order to change the future, at this stage he can only increase his EM score. The main character entered the room and, smiling, exclaimed, looking ahead, that he had returned. He decided to first see what was currently available to him, and the screen lit up with a golden light. There were several screens in front of him, and he saw battles against others by pressing the touch button. He believes that if he were to go and fight against his classmates now, it would be no different from beating up children. If he remembers correctly, the so-called basic training was something one could say inhumane, essentially testing the soldier's abilities by simulating various brutal military conditions. This is clearly not military academy level. In his past life, this type of competition had been completely repugnant to him. But now he had already felt the taste of war, and then he decided to choose it. The protagonist reached out his hand to the touchscreen and boldly pressed it. The system welcomed him as a student of the Dragon Letters Military Academy, assigned a specific number. Since he missed a month of competition, he will be deducted 10 points, and the system hopes he takes his training seriously. Who would have thought that the future commander of the Dragon's Teeth Battle Group was so careless during his training at the military academy? The control cabin has completed initialization of the simulated battlefield, and the student can enter. The EM response has been confirmed, and it is necessary to prepare for the connection of the simulated battlefield. The system indicated that the door was closing and the boy was completely prepared for it. The copy preparation dive begins, and the pain transfer coefficient is set to 100%. The suit's simulation began to run, and the suit was completed. The system announced that he would soon find himself on the Martian battlefield, amidst a magnificent display of fireworks. The main character seemed to be in another dimension, and he began to glow with bright blue rays. The Mars battlefield is a magnificent fireworks display, and the system has completed its loading. In front of us is the men's dormitory of the Faculty of Journalism of the School of Dragon Letters. The boy exclaimed that he needed to finish his first-year homework quickly. The professor asked him to hurry. The guy asked if anyone could help him with the editing. The materials this month were too generic, and there was no specific guidance on what to do with the homework. It was a guy from the journalism department at the Marco Polo School of Dragon Letters. He was thinking that he wouldn't be able to interview the girls anymore, and mixed media videos weren't very engaging. Besides, the EM exam is just around the corner and everyone is preparing diligently, which makes them look too stereotypical. Because of this, there's a shortage of good material. He's been scrolling through the bulletin board for an hour now, but even there it's all too boring. Most likely, all the popular records have already been cut and used as material, so he must find something among the unpopular ones. Suddenly, his gaze shifted, and he noticed that the battlefield of Mars was a magnificent fireworks display. Hadn't this ordeal, dubbed cremation, been frozen by the system? This exercise was developed by the Lunar Federation using Mars as a battlefield. The harsh environment there makes it incredibly difficult to navigate. Only the highest-ranking masters dared to try to pass it, but even such experts dropped out almost immediately. But it is too naive, and if he chose this exercise in an attempt to earn points, now he will fly out of there, cruelly humiliated in just a moment. Even freshmen wouldn't do something as stupid as this kid does. The difficulty level of this test is too high, so there's a high risk of serious injury, but he still set the pain level at 100%, and he wondered if this man was a masochist. Meanwhile, the main character was already in front of the monsters and thought that the smell of blood was missing here. However, he noticed that these stones, this wind and smell, this place was full of desolation and cruelty. This was definitely it. That battlefield of Mars with which he had once been so familiar. The battlefield here is a passage through a gorge, and the test subject must avoid possible artillery weapons until the very end of this passage. In addition to frequent unexpected shots fired from around corners, there are also countless induction mines to be wary of in this area. Before the test, a 1-minute demonstration of the gun's firing trajectories will be conducted, testing the tester's memorization speed unless he is a genetic warrior with the evolutionary ability of lightning-fast memory. The difficulty of this exercise is directly related to the level of pain he feels. A 100% pain sensation implies the same difficulty, and he believes the exercise will be over in just a second, maybe even in 3 seconds at most. He thinks the segment featuring his failure will be funny, considering he even has an expert air about him at the beginning. Mofeng smiled, clenched his fists, looked at the monitor, and decided that it was time to begin. The boy jumped with dexterity and began to run across the dangerous terrain. From all sides, monsters tried to attack him and tear him into small pieces. But the main character very deftly dodged them and ran faster and faster. He proved to be invulnerable and dodged the enemy's powerful attacks in time. He thought that even though his body was lagging behind a little, he still managed to jump into the blind spot of the photon cannons. The boy continued to fight the monsters that surrounded him from all sides, shooting from powerful weapons. The guy who was watching him was very surprised and his gaze changed. 100 meters of passage can be described as 100 meters of death. And to pass such a distance at a difficulty level of 70% is already a sufficient reason for pride. But what's most impressive is that after all that moving to avoid the shots, he still had the strength left to destroy the guns themselves and earn extra points. The boy was simply shocked and decided that this man was some kind of demon. Mofeng exclaimed that it was too late. He continued to dodge the new volleys that came out of the weapons. The guy continued to watch him and exclaimed that it was simply incredible, and he was already halfway there. There is definitely only one person there, but he can't shake the chilling feeling that there is a whole mighty army fighting there. The main character continued to fight, and many shots flew in his direction. He dodged again and again, and suddenly looking ahead, he decided this was bad. A multitude of different fragments and stones began falling from all sides and from above, towards him. The guy who was watching this couldn't understand what kind of perverted exercise this was, and what kind of person could even complete it. The protagonist continued to go through this incredible test and found himself in flames. He dodged, jumped over the golden tongues of fire, and found himself on high rocks. Mofeng was glowing with bright blue lightning that enveloped him from all sides. He broke through these stones and dodged the new danger faster and faster. He jumped over huge boulders and came out unscathed again and again. The guy watching him exclaimed that he was some kind of monster, and where did he get such jumping ability? The protagonist jumped over the high cliff again and turned away from the powerful blow. He found himself near a new elevation and, approaching it, jumped up. The guy watching him clenched his hands and exclaimed that this was bad, and the shot weakened the force of the jump, so he decided that the boy would not make it. Mofeng began to grab the rock with his hands and try to climb up on his own. He was already very close to the edge of the cliff and reached out to it with his hand. He still managed to overcome this elevation and found himself at the very top. A new shot in the form of bright golden lightning was already flying towards him. The boy noticed he still had 10 meters to go. He decided to calm himself down and said he would definitely get through it. And at this point, relying on speed was useless. He slowed down a bit. Trying to get through here at human speed alone would only be to your own detriment. The guy deftly dodged the bright golden rays that could have cut him into small pieces. He decided that only by relying on snap judgment and flexibility could he get through this stage. And without stopping, he went further, passing through the light dangerous circle. It was as if he found himself in front of multicolored monitors on which there were some recordings. The guy watching him exclaimed that, surprisingly, this was definitely not a dream. He had actually completed the Mars battlefield on 100% difficulty. He frowned, looked at the boy, and wondered who this person was. His look changed completely, and he really didn't expect such a turn of events. That last look, after which he had the feeling as if death itself was staring at him. The guy was trying to figure out who he was, and suddenly the system stopped. The guy exclaimed that the broadcast was over, and he didn't immediately notice it. The recording appeared again, and he is supposedly God. Although no, not so much God as a demon. From the beginning to the very end, there was an aura of destruction, and it came not from the battlefield, but from this man. The system issued a special announcement. An anonymous student completed the Mars battlefield and a magnificent fireworks display at 100% difficulty level with a grade of C, taking a place in the ranking. The guy who was watching what was happening thought that, judging by the voices, all the students in the faculty already knew about this. Just 5 minutes later, the largest military academies were simply overwhelmed with messages from students. Could this be one of the Academy's trump cards, and they've decided to make a name for themselves at the EM Elite competition? The Mars Battlefield cremation test was passed with a C grade, which is simply incredible. Before this, the maximum grade was A, meaning it increased by 2 orders of magnitude. Mofeng reflected that he still had a lot of problems with some details in the battle he just fought. But most likely, he didn't get the grade because of 2 major mistakes. These were indeed 2 big mistakes. If the rhythm had been tighter, he would not have injured his right hand. If he'd added a little more rotation to his jump, he wouldn't have nearly fallen. It looks like that body still needs some training. It's great that after setting a new record, he was awarded 100 points right away, although only God knows how long it will take him to get the full 800. In front of us is the spacious, bright library of the School of Dragon Letters. The boys were in this library, and the girl, with her arms crossed on her chest, looked at them attentively. She wondered if someone had actually broken the record, and it was simply unbelievable. The guys kept saying that this person must have cheated. The girl became thoughtful and also wondered what they were making so much noise about in the library. When she looked at her phone, she exclaimed that it was simply impossible. She read that an anonymous student from Earth had broken the record for passing the Mars Battlefield test, a magnificent ether-up, receiving the highest score, and currently had the best result among the Earth and Moon Federation. The girl thought about the fact that although the EM systems of the Lunar Earth Federation are constantly connected to each other via a network, the evaluation of tests is carried out separately, and each federation has its own rating. The gold content is higher on the EM and on the Moon, which is especially pronounced at the higher levels. The cremation test, rated C, is undoubtedly the most challenging combat section on both planets. It is simply impossible, and she tried to get through the magnificent fireworks display 80% and felt only one thing, namely despair, and only God can get through it 100% successfully. The kid said it was now clear who was the best, and he'd like to see the faces of those bastards from USAO. That's all well and good, of course, but why hadn't they leaked the walkthrough video yet? He hoped it wouldn't turn out to be a farce. A video of the test being completed with such a rating would be quite informative for them. At least something useful could be highlighted. She still thinks that this man is a crook, since he decided to maintain his anonymity, and it is unlikely that there are people on Earth who are capable of passing such a test on their own. Now we need to figure out how to get a video of the walkthrough. But only the person who walked through it, or the viewer who recorded it, can upload a video, and there's no other way. The boy who was watching all this asked why they decided to hold the meeting in his room. Then the guy replied that it was because he was the first one to scream loudly, so they figured he might have some scoop. One of the guys told Mark how exciting the news was. One of the guys asked if they thought this news was too incomprehensible and maybe it was just a fake. Another remarked that his words made him tremble. But if you think about it, the test really is impossible to pass. Before he could finish speaking, Marco Polo mentioned that he had a video. The guys were very surprised, and one of them asked what he had just said and if he really had a video. When the boys heard this, they immediately surrounded Marco Polo and demanded that he show them the material. Then one of the guys asked, coughing, if it was possible to watch the video he had just mentioned. Marco Polo immediately adjusted his glasses with his hands, and the guys were happy when he talked about the video. But they began to approach him faster and faster, and he asked what they were doing because it was his recording. One of the guys asked if he'd trade the video for his treasure. The other one grabbed the guy and asked him to let them watch it, so they could check if the video was real. Marco Polo promised to show them, but asked them to promise that they would not prevent him from implementing it himself. The guys immediately crowded around him, and one asked the other not to push, and the second replied that he smelled. And so the participants immediately crowded around Marco Polo and began to watch with their mouths open. They watched with their mouths open, wondering if this was really the man in front of them. Where did he get this incredible reaction and this crazy feeling of pressure from? One of the guys was simply shocked and asked who could even withstand this, and the second exclaimed that he was too strong. Marco Polo thought that although he was looking for the second time, the feeling of power had not diminished in the least. It would be great if he was an Earthling, but he was definitely an Earthling, at least a student at a military academy on Earth. 20 minutes later, Marco Polo asked the boys to get out of here. Marco Polo clenched his fists and asked the guys to publish this video of the fight. This is such a cool fight, and every student of dragon writing should see it. He decided that this would bring glory to their journalism department, and the guys asked to watch it as soon as possible. But why has no one clicked yet, and the number of views has suddenly increased unexpectedly? They're #1 on the live streams. And who's this bastard doing this? The guy exclaimed that a video of the Mars battlefield had been released. The other guys wondered if it was true or not, and the video was uploaded to Marco's newsfeed. They quickly went to watch and were amazed at how he could move so fast. This guy was too strong, and who was he? Before us again is the women's dormitory of the Dragon Letters School. The girl wondered what happened when she heard too much noise. The recording had already stopped, and she couldn't understand why it was suddenly so noisy outside. The headmistress was very angry and again asked what was going on and what all the fuss was about. How could she even record anything in such a situation? Her friend asked her to be quieter because she was an excellent class monitor and she would show her something interesting. The girl replied to her friend that they had different interests, so she should forget about it. But she did not calm down and explain to the headman that this was definitely something that both of them would like. This is just a real macho, but the headman did not calm down and said that she would not watch anything. A friend asked to take a look anyway so she could see for herself how fierce he was. The class monitor exclaimed that she knew about this C-grade attempt, but his anonymity didn't inspire confidence. But her friend explained that it was about to start, and she began to watch the screen carefully. Suddenly, her gaze changed when she saw a familiar appearance. This reaction is simply incredible. Its speed and ability to observe its surroundings, and on top of that, its terrifying tolerance. Even with a 100% sense of pain, it doesn't hesitate in the slightest when injured. However, true experts know that after the removal of pain nerves, a person's reaction drops by several levels, and then such passage becomes even more impossible. And this is a kind of paradox. What kind of training must one undergo to achieve such self-control? Frankly, it's surprising that such a terrifying creature exists, and I'll likely have to compete with it in the tournament. Moreover, that last look of his exuded boundless peace of mind and a will to fight. It felt as if no matter who came against him, no one would be able to stop him. If she were to become his opponent, she might even become intimidated during the fight. She could only hope she didn't encounter him at the very beginning of the EM competition. Meanwhile, her friend called this guy handsome and a real man. She felt like every cell in her body was ready to give in. He really was the perfect man too, with that look that left you speechless, like an electric shock, wondering what this guy looked like. In front of us is the campus of an American school. One of the guys mentioned that they've launched a broadcast featuring a walkthrough of the School of Dragon Letters. The man's technique was so superb that he remarked that he was certain he would never be able to master it. The other replied that he didn't even know where such a person could have come from. Meanwhile, in Marco Polo's dorm room, the guy smiled and exclaimed that the video had spread to all the major colleges. The other guy explained that real-time views had already exceeded the views of this week's top news stories by tenfold. Marco Polo exclaimed that this was very good, and this time their homework would be done with extra. And so the next day arrived. The fat man said that because of all the noise with the expert, he was able to calmly look at the space beauties for me. So, an anonymous expert has appeared, and can he have a figure like Christina's? Could there be a sweet voice like Chujiang's? The boy decided to restrain himself from such thoughts. He opened his eyes and said that today was the fat man's great day and stood up to his full height. The guy continued to have fun and look at various special accessories, including a homemade support flag. Liu Mengli's autograph session, and he's on his way. Mo Feng, emerging from the shower, looked closely at his comrade. It's all started, and maybe it's worth inviting him to dinner tonight. Otherwise, he'll have to stay here alone for the whole weekend. Mo Feng immediately invited Lei to dinner. Didn't he say the food at the orphanage was bad? He invited him to his home and said there would be fish stew today. The fat man immediately rejoiced and exclaimed that he hadn't eaten anything tasty in a long time and really wanted the fish. The protagonist wondered why it had started following him wherever he went. He asked the fat man if he was busy that evening and asked if he would like to go to their family dinner. Lei asked his bro if he looked like a man who had no plans for the evening and said that today was the big fat man's day and he had been waiting for it for 2 whole months. Was he really going to meet his goddess again? He should have done as he did and admitted that even if he was rejected, at least it would have been a useful experience. The fat man asked her to remember that simply looking at her was enough for him, and that loving her didn't mean owning her. Mo Feng replied that he was concentrating on racking up points and that anyone who didn't get 800 would have to wash their socks for a month. The fat man asked if he was serious now and asked if he was deliberately trying to ruin his mood. The boy said that he was returning home for dinner and asked her to try to control herself and not drool in front of her goddess. The main character had already approached the door and exclaimed that it smelled delicious and that the aroma of stewed fish was simply incredible. His father met him and exclaimed that the rascal had already returned, smiling at him. He has a good eye. And this girl and his mother even looked alike in some ways when they were young. The boy couldn't understand what his father was talking about. Mom really did dye her hair, and he couldn't figure out what had happened today. Dad said he'd go cook because his wife was already angry. The boy did not expect that they had guests and saw several girls standing next to each other in front of him. The girl approached her brother and asked him to hold his hand and look in that direction. When the boy glanced at the girl, he saw a familiar face in front of him and she waved her hand and said hello. The protagonist couldn't understand why Zhou Zichen came to them and immediately looked at his sister. The boy decided that it was certain and obvious that this was all the work of Mo Xiaoxing. Zhou Zichen had never been to their home before, and it seems his actions have already made a difference. He hopes he can make more of a difference and get rid of the strangers. Although Xiaoxing and Zhou Zichen are in different years, they are both members of the Genius Club at the Dragon Script School. Somehow they became good friends, and thanks to this, he was also able to meet Zhou Zichen. The girl asked the student why he wasn't greeting her. The boy replied that there was no need to greet her when the fairy herself had come to visit them, and that it was a great honor for him. The mother asked her son to stop acting frivolously and go wash his hands and start setting the table. She couldn't understand what had changed in this boy, but there was something familiar and something alien about him. They say military school changes people, and while he hadn't known the meaning of politeness before, now he seemed more serious. The boy told his mother that he was going to carry out her orders and went into the kitchen to see his father. He asked him to help him show off his skills. The little sister asked her brother not to embarrass himself, because his ignorant skill would only frighten Sister Zichen. The boy told his sister that he definitely couldn't beat her at this. Mo Xiaoxing got angry and told her mother that her brother was bullying her. Then the main character went into the kitchen as quickly as possible and told his father that he could leave it to him. Mo Feng immediately began to use the spatula, and the frying pan began to spin in his hands. The father noticed that his son was doing well and the boy asked him to try. The man exclaimed that it was delicious and actually very close to his level. He thought that it seemed his military training had paid off, and he was finally becoming independent. The opportunity to cook for his family is a rare thing for him. And now, he can use the culinary skills he practiced on Mars. The father approached his son and, putting his hand on his shoulder, asked him to have a drink a little later. And finally, the boy began setting the table and announced that all the dishes were ready. He offered his parents and guests chopsticks and wished them bon appétit. He asked the girl to try to eat it while the dish was hot, and it would be much tastier. The girl immediately thanked him for this, and the sister thought that being polite and keeping distance was a pretty smart technique, and she did not expect that with his brother's IQ such a thing was possible. Had he really grown up? Mo Feng turned to his sister and asked her to take another one, as she wouldn't be full with just one. The girl would like to ask Mo Feng to teach her how to cook some dishes if possible. The mother noticed that her son had become a much better cook. The protagonist's mother told him that she and his father would go for a walk to aid their digestion. Mo Feng replied that he and Xiaoxing would clean up in the meantime. The woman told her husband that she had excellent manners and was attractive. She had also heard that she was the head of the Genius Club at the Dragon Letters School. The boy walked into the room and said he was done asking if they wanted an apple. The girl replied that she would if it wasn't too much trouble. Xiaoxing turned away and said that she wouldn't be there, and explained that a classmate had called her, so she would go to her room. They could eat for now. The boy decided he understood perfectly well that Zhou Zichen shouldn't be his soulmate. Even though she was so beautiful, she shouldn't be so close right now. Now he must focus on changing the future and preventing the alien invasion. The boy began to pour the remaining apple he'd cut into pieces onto the plate and handed it to the girl. She, too, thanked Mo Feng and asked if there was a problem with her sudden arrival. She began to eat the apple and thought about how not long ago he had acted completely confused in front of her. But less than a week later, he was playing along with her in front of William without any problems. It was like he was a completely different person now. Although she came today because Xiaoxing somehow told her to use her brother as a shield, she had to admit that she was a little tempted by his performance in front of William. Mo Feng told Zhou Zichen that everything was fine and that she was his sister's close friend, so it was perfectly normal for her to come to see her. Although it seemed like the parents had misunderstood something, he would explain everything later. The girl said that the uncle and aunt were quite nice, and she liked them very much. The main character laughed and told the girl that nothing could embarrass her. With a very deft movement, he began to cut the apple peel and throw it away. Zhou Zichen was very surprised by his peeling method. The thickness of the peeled skin is uniform everywhere, as is the angle at which he peels it. This cannot be achieved with mere skill alone. The boy noticed that the taste was really good and the nostalgia for several years spent on godforsaken Mars, not to mention the sour ones, he wouldn't even refuse a basket of rotten apples. Josichin said that she had actually come today to ask him for a favor. When it came down to it, she didn't like to think about the right words to use. The protagonist looked at the girl and asked if she wanted him to work part-time as her shield. Josichin explained that she was Xiaoxingda's friend, and that they had been studying together for a long time, so he might be willing to help her. She would agree to any terms. The next competition was very important to her. The boy listened to her attentively and, looking at her, asked if she could arrange a permanent position for him. Josichin was surprised and, blushing slightly, asked what he meant. Then she smiled a little and said that she couldn't promise this, but it was possible in the future. She slipped up a bit today and feels like she can't keep up with the pace of conversation at all. Mofeng coughed and said it was a joke, but it was best not to let his mother hear it, or she wouldn't leave him alone. He extended his hand to the girl and said it was nothing to him. His appetite had been increasing lately, and his meal ticket alone wasn't enough. Josichin smiled and exclaimed, "Yes," she agreed. He doesn't know, but for some reason he suddenly felt like fooling around. After experiencing the ups and downs of his past life, he was able to see Josichin again. He has long since lost his youthful stupidity and impulsiveness, so it is most likely simply due to nostalgia for his youth after meeting an old friend. Meanwhile, his sister pressed herself against the door and thought that it was too quiet there, so she didn't know how her brother was coping there. The girl decided that this was a very rare opportunity, and if she messed everything up, there would be no next time. But she was very curious and decided to go and look, peeking around the corner. But she was a little upset and couldn't understand why they were only seriously discussing a strategic analysis of their club's affairs. It's all over. Their course is much more difficult than her brother's, and he's definitely going to embarrass himself. Xiaoxing decided it was best not to look at it. Josichin thought that he had problems with his studies. Again, imagine her expectations. He really understands the curriculum of their genius club. He so quickly identified the key points and clues to complete the task of the entire strategic matter. The girl couldn't understand whether it was luck or a coincidence and again thought about his actions. His blood younger sister Xiaoxing has such incredible talent, he shouldn't be deprived of it either. But the girl said that his academic performance was low, and maybe he just didn't know how to use his power effectively. The main character asked what was going on and whether he was right or whether she was thinking about something else. Josichin suddenly exclaimed that everything was correct, after which she said that she had not thought of anything else, and everything she said was correct. When I decided to talk about something else and said that all these recently appeared a recording of an anonymous expert passing through the battlefield of Mars. She asked the boy if he had heard about it, and he replied that he had heard a little. Josichin remarked that his actions on the Mars battlefield alone could serve as a textbook. Someone from the journalism department filmed a video and posted it on the forum, so he could watch it himself. He should pay attention to the reaction, habits, and way of thinking of this expert, and this is the best way to improve himself. Human genes have a dominant heredity, and since Xiaoxing's talent is so great, he, as her brother, should not be much inferior to her either, and he just needs to find a way to improve himself. The girl exclaimed, winking at the main character, that she was sure that he too could become very strong. Mofeng smiled a little embarrassedly and asked if she had just praised him. Josichin also smiled, closed her eyes, and asked if it bothered him. Mofeng smiled and said that he would take it as a compliment. The girl, looking at the boy, said that it was already too late for her to go home. Then he promised to take her home. After they said goodbye, the boy asked her to come again when she had free time. Xiaoxing was already near her brother and said that his greatest sister had created such an opportunity for him with great difficulty, and he had only brought her to the next block and returned. She got angry and asked if he really didn't understand anything at all, and if it was really that difficult to at least accompany her home. Mofeng exclaimed, stroking his sister's head. That time on weekends was precious, and he still wanted to play a game of Yankee with his dad. His sister asked what that had to do with it and said he hadn't seemed so calm when he'd gotten drunk a few days earlier, and the alcohol had probably made him dizzy. She agreed to let him be her boyfriend. Mofeng wondered what kind of boyfriend he was. He'd just be an occasional accountant. He wouldn't be more than a friend, so she had nothing to worry about. The boy told his little sister that it looked like she'd lost weight again. Her ribs would soon be showing, but she was still losing weight. Xiaoxing asked him not to change the subject and stop smiling so mischievously. Does he even understand his situation, and does Coastal Tower first meet the moon? Common sense. She arranged all this to help him achieve her, to become her daughter-in-law. Mo Feng asked the girl to stop worrying about her brother, and frankly, she wasn't his type. Xiaoxing was very surprised and grimaced and asked if he could tell her who he liked. Suddenly, the guy exclaimed that he'd seen the light and, for better or worse, he'd decided to reach 800 points. After all, a man has to make a career. The girl told her brother that he probably had a fever and asked if he wanted to meet a good psychiatrist. The boy asked her to consult with him instead. His parents asked what he had said to his sister again. Xiaoxing explained to her mother that her brother was bullying her again. Mo Feng, after saying goodbye, said he was going to class and his parents asked him to be careful on the road. The father couldn't understand because usually he could, blindfolded and with trembling hands, inflict a crushing defeat on him in 2 moves. But today, for the first time in his life, he lost to his son. This boy's chess maneuvers suddenly became so amazing and full of power that he lost 3 games in a row, even though he tried his best. The mother also thought about it, because usually he froze as soon as she started talking. But now, for 2 hours, he listened to all her grumbling with a smile. Before, 2 or 3 words spoken could confuse her brother. Xiaoqing thought about this. He couldn't answer anything, and today it was as if he was possessed by the god of war, and now he was destroying the source even before the war began, with just a couple of neither salty nor insipid phrases. This time, on the contrary, he silenced her. The mother told her husband that his sudden change was definitely due to love. Aren't these changes too great? What if Xiaoxing also has a lover? But the girl, blushing, told her parents that she didn't want one. In front of us is the military school of dragon letters, namely the observation location. The fat man was next to the main character, and he seemed to be sleeping because he was very bored. But suddenly the boy's gaze changed. Was it really the Iron Eagle destroyer in front of them? The destroyer Iron Eagle is one of the newest ships in the army, having been launched less than 10 years ago. The boy looked at the screen and became interested in why it was so badly damaged. And everyone must have thought about it. The man was a professor named Cabrillo. He remarked that it was quite interesting, and that Liao had been one of the destroyers that had been sent 6 months earlier to explore the environs of Pluto. This caused quite a stir in the Federation, and all the media outlets vied with each other to cover it. But no significant evidence was found. And then this battleship appeared as a ghost ship. They'll talk about this today, and this ship was accidentally filmed by the military outside the solar system 2 weeks ago. But this battleship soon disappeared again, and after that, a ghost ship appeared in space. There were numerous reports of their sightings, and the battleship, missing for 6 months, became a ghost ship. However, it's worth noting that the degree of oxidation and decay on the ship's hull surface had reached such a degree that it seemed hundreds of years had passed. There are currently 3 main theories for this: the primitive wormhole theory, the time tunnel theory, and the mirage theory. Mo Feng, these theories sound very similar to something, and they couldn't have arisen from wormholes. The reason is rather in the bodily fluids that were produced by foreigners. Any equipment or machinery during the war that came into contact with alien bodily fluids would also corrode after a while. It looks like they caused the destruction in the photographs, but he can't be sure without seeing the ship with his own eyes. There are still 5 years until the alien attack, so can we really assume they've already discovered the existence of humans and are attempting to investigate them? If so, it confirms that the surprise attack by the aliens was carefully prepared. Moreover, this shows that alien intelligence is not only absent, but also equal to or even superior to human intelligence. Cabrillo said that, judging by his expression, he had something to say. This Mo Feng was the only one who failed last semester. How dare he behave like this during a lecture, and he asked him to stand up and share his thoughts with everyone. He told the boy that he knew he was a thorn in the professor's side, and that even if he was distracted, he could at least pretend to listen to him. One of the girls, looking at the screen, said that this was the same guy who confessed to Zhou Zichen. The second called him a fool, and indeed, they realized it was him. The main character approached the professor and, looking him in the eye, said that he believed that all 3 theories were nonsense. Does he really doubt the professor's words? People around him thought so, laughed at him. Has he really lost his mind? Who does this kid think he is? The professor couldn't understand why he wanted to interrupt his lecture. He exclaimed that in that case they would all listen to what he had to say on the matter, and that he expected some useful thoughts. The girl who was watching this decided that this guy was completely unable to stay out of trouble. The protagonist said that although the professor is a primitive wormhole and destructive, in the second photograph one can clearly see signs of biological corrosion in the form of rust spots, which definitely has nothing to do with a primitive wormhole. Well, As for the time tunnels, that's something out of science fiction. And if that were the case, the degree of destruction of the hull would have been much greater. The protagonist continued to explain, pointing to the screen, that as they could see in picture number 6, the case even still had some performance left. As for the mirage theory, it is more probable, but it is also incorrect. The professor paused and remarked that, based on various situations, the mirage theory did indeed seem the most plausible. He asked how he himself would explain it all. The man thought to himself that no one usually pays attention to such details, but he mentioned it. Although it's impossible to say for sure, at least 99% of the negative factors are present. If you look at the actual geographic location in the 5th photograph, you can see that the area on the edge of the solar system is different. And even if something like this were to happen, a battleship couldn't operate too far from the solar system. So where could the mirages have come from? And don't they know that there are no zones with such functionality near the solar system? The professor reflected that his words seemed simple, but they got the point across. If he'd mentioned the star region, was he simply guessing based on a single photograph? Or was he truly that knowledgeable about it? The girl remarked that Mo Feng was being too funny, and how could he possibly know the theory of the multi-location of Regis projections? One of the boys exclaimed that it did make sense. The professor said, looking at those around him, that they would return to this question later and there was very little time left, so now they would move on to the next topic. And now the time has come after the lecture when the professor approaches the main character. He approached him and asked where he had heard what he had just said. Mo Feng replied that he thought some creature was living on this ship. The professor asked the boy why he'd only stood out once and then returned to his fantasy. Was he really trying to tell me there were aliens there? Mo Feng told the man that anything was possible. The professor then asked him not to dwell on these thoughts all day long, but to instead focus on his course of study. The boy reflected on how difficult it is for people living in peacetime to imagine an alien invasion. It's unknown where exactly the aliens came from, and perhaps they created wormholes that lead directly to the solar system. Is it possible that a greeting sent by humans to the universe once helped aliens determine their coordinates? It's entirely possible, but to the people of that time, his thoughts seem insane. The class monitor stopped the boy and asked him to calm down and not bother the professor. The fat man said it was already lunchtime and asked his friend to come eat with him. In front of us is the dining hall for students of the School of Dragon Letters, where everyone has already gathered. The fat man asked his friend if he was still eating away his sorrows. He exclaimed, looking at the boy, that he would soon go broke this way. The village headman was also surprised and asked how he could fit so much. Mo Feng replied that his training had simply tripled recently. While the guys were talking, other students were standing to the side and everyone suddenly glanced in that direction. A girl simply walked into the room and took food on a tray, looking at the main character and his comrades. The boys all looked at Zhou Zichin, who was approaching the table. Although she's only in her 3rd year, her authority within the Dragon Letter School is immense. She's said to be in the top 10 in the Earth Federation, and every battle at such points is truly incredibly difficult and she copes with it. The boys watched from the sidelines and decided something was about to happen. The village headman noticed that she was coming here to cause trouble for Luo Feng. The girl actually approached their table and asked if she could sit next to them. The guys who were sitting in the cafeteria watched what was happening, and they became interested in what kind of drama was unfolding. The protagonist turned to his fat friend and asked if he would give up his seat to the younger woman. The guy immediately agreed and began to rise from his chair. The boys decided when the girl sat down next to them that this was going to be a lot of fun. She asked the elder son what they had been talking about. Zhu Zichin decided that in order to make the main character her shield, she would need the cooperation of the smaller figures. The girl decided that Sun Xiaorui was undoubtedly the key. Suddenly, the village headman glanced at the fat man. He asked the guys to take a break for a bit since something like this had happened just recently. All these theories are not worth discussing, and he objects. The man exclaimed that if they don't provide evidence, they will be thrown out of the room. The village headman asked Lei to stop making things up, laughing. She thought to herself that men could indeed forget even their own last name when they saw a beautiful woman. Zhou Zichin suddenly smiled and said that she thought the elder's words made perfect sense. Over the years, many Earth and Moon ships have crashed. The prospect of star travel is simply too exciting, so there's always someone who's bound to rush in. It was very unexpected that the elder was engaged in the study of such specialized teachings. Mo Feng thought that the younger one was acting like some kind of actress. Since she wanted to put on a show here, couldn't she have warned him in advance? And couldn't they have chosen a less crowded place instead of this huge cafeteria? The boy exclaimed that his knowledge was superficial. And by the way, doesn't it seem to them that aliens might be to blame for everything? The headmistress asked Jo Zichin if she'd seen the video and whether she thought it could be someone in the top 10. The C-rank achievement not only broke the A-rank record on Earth, but also the even higher record on the Moon. Lei said that it was definitely true, and she probably had a ton of connections. Did she by any chance know who he was? This guy was definitely some kind of pervert, treating himself so cruelly. Before he could finish speaking, the main character suddenly sneezed and, apologizing, asked him to continue. Jo Zichin said it was entirely possible, but unlikely, and she'd dealt with people in the top 20. But this mysterious man's style didn't match any of them. Lei asked if it could be that in this case, 10 years ago, he only trained in going through cremation. The girl replied that she didn't know, there was too little information about him. But given his movement, his level was enough to get at least into the top 50. However, only a real battle can reveal his true strength. After all, trials and battles are very different. Suddenly, Mo Feng stepped on the fat man's foot with all his might under the table, and he was surprised by this. The fat man explained to his friend that a goddess was sitting next to him, and it was not appropriate for him to eat so carefree. Jo Zichin told her elder sister that if she wasn't busy during the day, they could practice together. She wanted to ask her for advice on a few things. The girl immediately agreed and said she wouldn't mind learning from her. Jo Zichin turned to Mo Feng and said that since this was mutual learning, why don't Senior Mo Feng and Lei come with them? The main character wanted to object and said that in the afternoon he needed to go collect points. There was very little time, and he had no time to follow them. He didn't have time to say this before he hugged his friend and exclaimed that of course there would be no problem, and they would get together at 2 o'clock. The girls said goodbye and said that in that case they would see each other later. The fat man leaned over to Mo Feng and asked if he would go with him. Surely he could spare some of his time for this. The guy wondered why he was so reluctant to go to their training session. Mo Feng explained to his comrade that he had other plans after lunch, so they could go on without him. He wouldn't agree to that anyway. The fat man began to plead with him, exclaiming that this wouldn't do and that he couldn't put his business aside. After all, the younger one knew him, and if he didn't go, he couldn't go either. The main character began to get up from the table and said that he could not help in any way since he had his own training. Then, the fat man stood up to his full height and pointed his finger at him, shouting that if he didn't go, he'd wear his underwear. Mo Feng replied that in that case, he'd throw him out to Lulu. The fat man got angry and said that God knew he didn't want to do it, but it was ruining his chance to get a girlfriend. Whether he wants to believe it or not, he will post on the campus local network that they are two homosexuals. He just needs to meet Jo Zichin. Who knows? Maybe by the end of the semester, he'll already be dating some underclassmen. He started calling the boy again, and he turned to him and said that she took him. Lei hugged him by the arm and exclaimed with a laugh that he knew the boy would not abandon him. Mo Feng asked them to leave him alone and keep a distance of at least 1 meter. He thought that if this change allowed Lei to lead a better life at military school, that would be fine too. It didn't matter that he'd lose the opportunity to earn a few more points. He had to live a flawless life. In front of us stretched a wide fire training area of the Dragon Letters School. The village chief asked Mo Feng and the fat man not to be late, and didn't they know that it was impolite to keep two ladies waiting? The guys had already arrived at the room and looked at the angry girl who was standing in front of them. Lei told her that she'd never find a boyfriend if she kept nagging like that. Jo Zichin responded that if the older woman were to look for a boyfriend, she was sure there would be a long line of men waiting for her. She turned to the boys and asked if they wanted to take a few shots. Lei immediately declined, saying he couldn't. But the main character kicked him in the back and asked him not to be shy and to show his Lulu what he was capable of. The village chief asked her friend who Lulu was. Mo Feng explained it was a mantra, a kind of self-hypnosis that would help the fat man shoot more accurately. And now, the fat man was already wearing protective glasses and headphones, getting ready to shoot. The protagonist looked closely at his comrade and noticed that he was nervous. Jo Zichin remarked that Senior Lei was indeed good at this. The village chief also praised the fat man for his accurate shooting. She turned to her friend and suggested that they now show off their skills. And so the girls began to shoot one after another, very skillfully and boldly showing what they were capable of. The village chief turned to the protagonist and said it was his turn. Mo Feng declined, claiming he was a close combat fighter. But even if he fights in close combat, he must have the technique of fighting at a distance. The guy who said this added that not being able to even shoot a pistol is just plain lame, and that this younger guy really is like that. Mo Feng replied that Elder Zhuang was right, and he would definitely put in more effort in the future. But the headman slammed her hand on the table and asked whether he was a man or not. She then turned to the Elder Zhang and asked if he was asking for trouble. He laughed and told Xiao Rui that she had misunderstood. Xiao Rui got angry again and asked if she was his girlfriend. She asked him to call her by her first name, and the boy told the younger woman not to get angry, as that wasn't what he meant at all. The guy told Li William that if he had known that Sun Xiao Rui was also here, he would never have come here. William told the younger Xiao Rui that he didn't think it was worth mentioning, but it was rather pathetic for a man to rely on a woman. Besides, Elder Zhuang simply wanted to give him a few words of advice, and it was unlikely he'd ever get another chance like that. The elder woman, angrily, asked Mo Feng to decline. William looked at the protagonist and remarked that he was just a shield. It was a shame Zhou Zichen couldn't find someone better. He told the girl that he was completely free this afternoon and asked how they could train together. He believed he was the only one qualified for that. The boy thought that he knew he shouldn't come here, and that he didn't have time to mess around with all this. Besides, now is not the best time to touch combat weapons. William told the fat man that he should lose weight, because if he joined the army with such a body, he would only be a cook there. Mo Feng replied to Elder Li that he was trying for his own good, and that even he was not competent enough to be Zhou Zichen's sparring partner. There's no need to force her, because if he's not even on the same level as her, he'll only drag her down. And Zhou Zichen is the hope of their entire school. William explained that if he wanted to say he wasn't good enough, then what about him? The village chief remarked that Mo Feng had become too boastful. The guys exclaimed that he was a real show-off and that he had forgotten all about being there. Senior William scored 1,900 points. He will hardly be able to score even half of that. While they were talking, the main character had already put on headphones and protective glasses, getting ready to shoot. There were many targets in front of the boy, and the guys began to watch carefully. One of the boys noticed a double Huben. Zhou Zichen was surprised that all the targets were moving. The headman also thought about the fact that this test is the most difficult one here. The guys started watching and they became curious about why he froze, whether he had changed his mind about shooting. The fat man clenched his fist and asked his comrade to hurry up, and now he began to shoot with all his might. The boy was very experienced in this matter, and the shots kept flying and flying right on target. Mo Feng hit the targets very skillfully. Time after time he showed the guys how good he was at it. And so he finally placed the weapon from which smoke was coming out right on the table in front of him. Suddenly he closed his eyes and, drawing his eyebrows towards his nose, asked himself to relax because that would be enough. The girls couldn't understand what was happening, and this was Huben A, the most difficult speed shooting exercise. Li, clutching his head in his hands, exclaimed that he had hit all the targets, and every single one of them was in the top 10, and that damn him and his shooting technique. Mo Feng told Elder Li that he wasn't very skilled at this yet, and needed more time to observe. He'd picked up this pinpoint shooting from Fatty Lulu, and what did they think of it? William suddenly laughed and said that he was a very accurate shooter and that he should continue to try. William took his friend and told Zhou Zichen that he had some things to do, so he needed to go back and he would contact her later. Mo Feng wished them luck and thanked them for their support, saying he would remember this praise for the rest of his life. The boys looked at their comrade in great surprise, and the girls also did not expect such behavior, similar to Mo Feng's move. Lei approached the protagonist and told his brother that he would now be his real brother. Mo Feng asked who he had been to him before. The fat man, clutching his head, explained that he'd previously seen him as simply an older man, someone who could be used to buy food in the cafeteria. The boy, infuriated, exclaimed that he hoped he wasn't serious. Lei raised his hands and told his bro that if he didn't think he was stupid, he really wanted to teach him. He wanted to learn to shoot as well as he did. The boy grabbed him by the cheek and said that even if he was stupid, there were very few people in this world who could be considered smart. Initially, this pinpoint shooting from an incorrect position with mixed weapons was invented by him. The future king of weapons, but for now, an ordinary, happy, homebody fatso. Back to the girls' dormitory at the Dragon Letter School, Zhou Zichen thought about how Mo Feng had initially seemed frivolous and nervous, especially in front of her. But recently he has been so reserved, and earlier Mo Xiaoxing complained to her about Mo Feng's ineptitude. But his shooting today, and is it really because of great talent? His pistol shooting style today was unusually beautiful. While strength can be hidden, how can a person's character change so quickly? If Li William hadn't started ridiculing Lei, Mo Feng wouldn't have done anything. In other words, in both her situation and this case, he didn't want to take advantage of the situation to harass her. and he genuinely wanted to help. Could he really be the same person? The village head woman also lay on the bed, thinking about the protagonist. Was he really that strong? He'd certainly seemed so careless before. It seemed she'd underestimated him. Perhaps he really could keep Joe Zichin company, the girl thought. But she had to come up with such a stupid excuse, so she started reading the messages on her phone. The boy had written to the headman asking her to let him go tomorrow because he had a stomachache. Then the headman asked if this happened every month. The boy replied that perhaps he'd been overeating lately, but he guaranteed that he and the fat man would live up to the headman's expectations by the registration deadline. In the meantime, he was very much counting on her support, and she replied that in this case, she would not accept failure. Mo Feng told the village chief that he would do as she said, and he knew he could rely on her. At the Battle of Sun Lake, Sun Xiaorui was responsible for supporting the ground forces, but because the battle was almost completely lost, the headquarters ordered the navy to retreat. Mo Feng became very angry when he remembered this, because Sun Xiaorui died because of him. If the past him had not been so lazy, untalented, and willful, he would not have deserved her sacrifice. The boy grabbed his chest with his hands and screamed very loudly because it hurt. He clutched his chest with his hand and could not understand what was happening to him now, being surprised by it. When he opened his t-shirt, he saw some unusual scar on his chest. He became very curious when he had stayed, since he had never even noticed him. It looks like a tattoo, but feels like some kind of soft metal. It's not a hallucination, but something inexplicable. Aren't there too many inexplicable phenomena lately? Luckily, his body doesn't react strongly to this scar. Suddenly, his friend knocked on the bathroom door and asked if he'd fallen in there. Lei continued to speak seriously about how he was going to call the emergency services. The main character decided to hide this scar as quickly as possible, because he couldn't let the fat man find out about it. He quickly opened the door and asked his friend if he wanted to learn shooting, and if he was sure about it. Then the fat man clenched his fists and said with excitement on his face that of course he wanted to. The next day, the boys were playing sports on the playground. Fatso yelled at his brother, "I can't do it anymore." Mo Feng asked him to be patient, and if he continued to complain, he would give him another 10 laps. He needed to keep accelerating and not stop. Lei exclaimed that he was already beginning to regret it, and that he should have continued watching Space Beauties in his dorm. Mo Feng ordered the boy to run 10 more laps. He asked the boy to push himself, because it was all to stimulate his genetic strength. It would be safer in the future if he became stronger now. Now, having returned to the past, he must find a way to prevent catastrophe. Even if the alien invasion cannot be stopped, humanity's defeat must certainly not be allowed to happen again. Another 3 hours passed when the fat man fell onto the treadmill and exclaimed that he really couldn't do it anymore and his whole body ached. The protagonist explained that today was just the beginning. The intensity of his training would increase as he adapted. He asked his friend to rest while he ran 30 laps and then returned to him. Lei decided that his brother had truly gone mad and that this type of physical training was worse than death. However, the problem was that his own training was at least 5 times more intense than his. One of the guys told his friend that those two were pulling tires again and had been doing it for several days. The second guy asked if this was the same guy who shot all the targets the other day. Mo Feng told his comrade that it was quite good and that he had adapted well to it in recent days. Lei replied that if he couldn't even handle this, then how could he be his younger brother? He asked them to maintain this momentum and run 10 more laps, after which they would go eat meat. When the fat man heard about food, he started running even faster. In front of us again is the dining hall in the northern area of the Dragon Letter School. The cook asked the boys what they would eat, and they unanimously answered that they would eat meat. Mo Feng handed over a card and said he'd have chops and he'd take whatever they had. Lei said he wanted pork, beef, lamb, and chicken, and asked for whatever was on the counter. The kids couldn't understand why there were only vegetables left and why there was no meat today. The others said everything had been sold out and there was nothing edible left. Brother Feng seems to have truly returned to the righteous path. It's great to be able to train with him and progress. The fat man reflected on how he spent almost all his time training and watching the news. He even turned down Zhou Zichin and Sun Xiaorui's invitations several times. Firstly, the aliens and the people of the moon are not connected in any way, and this can be proven by the fact that they also suffered huge losses during the war, so there was no benefit for them in this. The alien attack had a certain foresight. This means that it's possible that more advanced aliens existed, even though their existence hadn't yet been discovered. In these circumstances, he must get as close to the leadership as possible so that his words carry weight and can influence the strategic decisions of humanity. As for the scream coming from the base, it's likely that rebels simply appeared there. The second assumption is that the aliens of the moon are connected, which would be a more serious problem, as it seems like the whole thing was a conspiracy. The remaining percentages are carried out through funding from the Earth. But with the technology of the moon, it is not impossible that they could have stumbled upon aliens. In that case, Luna must have had a way to communicate with aliens, but spread false information among its ordinary citizens that this was impossible. If this is true, it could also explain the latest news about the base and the final battle. If Earth is left without the support of the Lunar Air Force, its army will quickly be destroyed, and then the moon will assume a dominant position. In that case, he would have to access information from the moon, not from Earth's leadership. But that would require even more effort. The situation is quite complex, and both these assumptions have their flaws and shortcomings. It's worth mentioning the enormous losses on the moon and the issue of alien settlement. However, whatever the true state of affairs there, he'll need further investigation to draw any conclusions. Mo Feng mentioned he'd like to let off some steam. Lei asked his friend if he could lend him his hard drive or if he could look for a photo of a girl. Mo Feng woke him up at 6 and asked what he was thinking about and if they'd lift weights after dinner. The fat man exclaimed, "Oh no, not that." Mo Feng said he'd go to the EM building and the fat man could lie down for now. Lei said he couldn't take it anymore and wanted to see the theatrical version of Space Beauties. The boy looked at his current score of 458 points, and he still had a lot of work to do. Last time, he'd gotten a C level, but it didn't bring him any joy. He would have preferred a weaker result to feel more confident in the army. The boy glanced at his phone and noticed that it was quite lively tonight. Meanwhile, the girl was in the EM battle simulator, the virtual battlefield of the city of R. Opposite her was an enemy who was dressed in heavy iron armor, Andrew's Pacific Military Academy, and the man were ranked 9th in the EM rankings. Zhou Zichen closed her eyes and began to concentrate on the battle. The protagonist also watched the shootout in the city closely, and they are both weapons experts. Zhou Zichen is strong in her sniping. Her elegant gait coupled with her sniper stance terrifies the enemy and almost always leads them to meet death. As for her opponent, Andrew, he's proficient with dual pistols. Perhaps a fan of North American cowboys, he chose the 9th-generation Thunder Eagles for their high firepower. Despite their similarities, the Thunder Eagle boasts more lethal force than the Huben, though it falls slightly short in accuracy. It is the most popular pistol in North America. Although Zhou Zichen is ranked higher than Andrew, the winner and loser among those competing in the top 50 of the EM cannot be determined solely by ranking. It is necessary to pay attention to the condition of people, the situation during the battle, and a number of other random factors. This is the duel between people with more than 2,000 points, and the winner is the one who finds more flaws in his opponent. The battle continued and bullets flew over the head of the girl and her opponent, who deftly dodged them. Zhou Zichen tried to move as quickly as possible and shoot her powerful weapon. Suddenly her gaze changed and she made a dexterous, nimble maneuver against her enemy. The girl noticed that his pistol had an excessively high rate of fire. If he continued to suppress her like this, her position would become unfavorable. Suddenly, her opponent ran out of ammo, which was a plus for the girl. She looked at this and decided that this was really her chance and began to shoot. She took advantage of the moment and very quickly brought the weapon into action against her enemy. The guy said that just a little bit more and it could have all ended, which was to be expected from 5th place. He smiled and said that he had managed to get quite close to the girl. Zhou Zichen was also very dexterous, and approaching him, she asked where he was going in such a hurry. The battle continued and the guy rose as high into the air as possible, as if he had cloned himself. The girl closed one eye and began to shoot as quickly as possible. She put her weapon forward and the enemy was already approaching, also firing volleys. There was a powerful explosion and a bright golden flash scattered in all directions. The enemy was already approaching the girl and she found herself right in front of him. The boys cheered for Zhou Zichen and asked her not to give up. Calling her a goddess, they asked her not to be afraid and said that this Andrew was too cruel. The protagonist was also watching what was happening, and no matter how annoying it was, Zhou Zichen was about to lose. She does have some decent sword skills, but she's up against Andrew, a master of indiscriminate combat. At first glance, he doesn't seem to be a fan of weapons, but in reality, this guy understands the strengths and weaknesses of many types of weaponry. It's much easier to focus on the weapon's specific features with bare hands. It was clear that he was unfamiliar with Zhou Zichen's sword technique. Most likely he had studied it well before the battle, which is why she became an easy target. Of course, this is a test for both sides. It's easier to learn under pressure. At least this time, Joe Zichin should understand that if your opponent is going for close combat, you can't give them a single opening. Lately, he's been needing a textbook to teach Lei how to shoot. Although he's rushing things, the result should be the same. The protagonist decided to do just that right now. He wanted to record it for his friend to learn from. Vertigo, and how the level designers came up with that name. While each level has its own unique features, the name is certainly not flattering. He smiled and asked his comrade to wait, and he would guarantee that this time he would be one step ahead. The boy looked at the system and, thinking about it, was glad that right now he could fix everything. In front of us stands the dormitory of the journalism faculty of the School of Dragon Letters. The guy said that Group 12 was resting, Group 13 was on shift, Group 21 was for support, and the guys immediately agreed. The boy thought that, according to his analysis, that mysterious man would appear again. If he'd simply wanted to become famous, he would have announced his achievement long ago. Be that as it may, he definitely couldn't disappear after appearing just once. That's why he organized shift surveillance and left only high-level ones where reaching rank C is possible. As soon as someone enters one of these exercises, their groups immediately begin observations, so that when this mysterious person appears again, they will immediately capture him. The operation was codenamed Demon Hunt. Given the atmosphere, using demon in the title is certainly no exaggeration. But there are so many people challenging this exercise and failing it, it's even unpleasant to watch them. They've been trying this for days without any results, and their morale has plummeted. On the other hand, couldn't he challenge low-level exercises? So low-level that no one even looks at them? For a monster like him, any difficulty should be equally boring. He approached the monitor and saw the word dizziness. He immediately adjusted his glasses and stared intently at the screen. He wondered if this was a low-level exercise that only beginners were interested in. He became curious why this student was taking it anonymously and decided to check. Could it really be that he in the back of the guy's head really does look like that genius? Although there are not enough anonymous students with such a body type, so one cannot be 100% sure. He started watching and noticed the twin Hubans the boy was using. He became curious about what kind of drug addiction this guy was planning and continued to watch him. He watched very carefully and noticed that this guy had compacted the Hubans very strongly. Mofeng thought that the tuning of the normal version of the Huban was too loose, so he tightened his grip. This way he will be able to deal damage continuously and, relatively speaking, the recoil will also increase. He'll just check the state of his recent training. Polo wondered if the recoil would be so intense that his wrist would be knocked back immediately after a series of shots. Was he really a masochist? It can't be, and his tuning method is quite unusual. Of course, for an expert this is commonplace, but you still have to become one to achieve that. The boy exclaimed to the Saipan teacher that he wanted to find a live broadcast at the school and asked if he could help him with this. Then the teacher, crossing his arms over his chest, asked him if he had anything impressive. Polo explained that he could be confident in his instincts and was confident that the material would be more than impressive. Saipan replied that he'd give him a chance, but if the broadcast was boring, he'd give him a low grade on his report card. The guy asked not to worry and promised he'd definitely enjoy it. And now, live on air, we're seeing a powerful battle from students of the Marco Polo Faculty of Journalism. The guys couldn't understand this madness. But why broadcast such a dizzying spectacle? Is this Marco completely crazy? Or does this guy have some connections? How could such a monstrous thing even be staged? One of the guys told the other that he thought they were showing a battle of some stars and that it was probably just a joke. This guy even pretends that he is adjusting the guns and that he is just showing off. The village chief thought that, judging by his tuning method, he was quite experienced. Joe Zichin also wondered why he'd chosen such a simple exercise if he was so experienced. Saipan, looking at the screen, said that this scoundrel decided to laugh at him and why he was so dizzy. The main character already had 2 guns in his hands and cast his gaze towards the target. He drew his eyebrows closer to his nose and decided to begin his battle with weapons in his hands. One of the guys said that this was just the beginning, and that it would be better to go watch a movie in the dorm. Zhou Zichin, crossing her arms, said that their views were too superficial. Meanwhile, the main character was already firing, looking at his targets. There were many targets in front of him that were spinning in different directions, making the task more difficult. Marco Polo decided that this was truly just a normal dizziness, boring and nothing out of the ordinary. Was he really kidding him? wanting him to get a low grade and shatter his dream of a high grade this semester? The main character continued to run and shoot at various targets that were spinning around him. He jumped and dodged the volleys that flew in his direction very deftly and quickly. Chuzichin wondered if Xiaorui also understood what she understood. This person's dizziness is completely different from theirs and is completely distinct. The protagonist continued to run and make his task more difficult by spinning in front of the targets. The Mishas also developed and revolved around him much faster than usual. The boy jumped as high as he could above the volleys that were flying in his direction. Chuzichin thought that, judging by his movements, he was already a first-class marksman. A defensive step to evade and dual-wielding pistols. With these techniques alone, he could easily reach 1500 EM. However, these are just dizzying exercises, nothing more than a regular snack. On 100% difficulty, there should be only 2 shooters and no camouflage effect. The boys couldn't figure out what was going on. Mo Feng decided he couldn't waste time on camouflaged shooters right now. The boy put his weapon in front of him again and saw his opponent. He looked at it very carefully and began to approach with another volley. He ran very fast and his eyes shone with excitement and a thirst to defeat the enemy in order to achieve his own goals. The boy ran very quickly and dodged more shots. He was incredibly fast and all the targets flew past him as he deftly dodged. Marco Polo noted that things had become more interesting and his shooting was quite accurate. But it still wasn't exciting enough. No matter how much he tested the system, it was definitely an unusual dizziness. Even though the level name matches, even he, the research supervisor, found the complexity a bit daunting. Chuzichin noticed that it wasn't just marksmanship, although it wasn't just accuracy. This guy managed to maintain such a terrifying hit rate despite having to adapt to his constantly changing walking speed. And besides, you need to constantly choose a position to dodge, and the difficulty of that level cannot even be imagined. The guys continued to watch what was happening and wonder if it was really an alpha laser rifle. The protagonist looked closely at the rifle and the 4 shooters who had mingled with the hostage. Simply put, a hostage is someone who cannot be attacked, and even hitting them accidentally will still count as failure. If you suddenly approach a hostage, you might not have time to react and accidentally injure them, and the inability to shoot in this chaotic pace can easily lead to death. Chuzichin thought that while she might have been able to react properly, her pace would definitely have slowed down and she still wouldn't have succeeded. Meanwhile, the boy continued to dodge and put his weapon in front of him, pointing it towards the 4. There were many shots and the boy began to jump as high as possible, dodging oncoming blows. The battle continued and Mo Feng decided not to give up as he approached another danger. The crowd started talking about how spry this guy was and how good his marksmanship was. They noticed that Chuzichin and Sun Xiaorui were also there. Chuzichin thought that a 6 or 7 meter dash should be an opportunity to catch her breath. But this man showed no sign of stopping. The next wave is already here and his body doesn't feel human at all. It was even more frightening that he didn't even need to breathe in such a situation. The boy pulled out his weapons and, turning them over, began to shoot very deftly. Then he rolled over, doing a few somersaults forward, and found himself on his feet again. The main character then jumped as high as possible and began spinning in the air. After that, he found himself on the ground again and continued shooting even faster. The girls were simply shocked and the boys also couldn't understand what kind of shooting technique this was. Mo Feng was very serious and saw something terrifying and huge in front of him. It was an 8-barreled, high-explosive fragmentation, large-caliber machine gun, the Patu Raptor, possessing the highest firepower in the Earth Federation. The gun was aimed precisely at the protagonist. A volley immediately erupted from it, aimed at the enemy. This is definitely not dizziness, and these are truly the gates of hell. A person definitely won't be able to get through this. Not only one person, but even a small team would be destroyed by such intense barrage fire. And the boy thought that finally something interesting was happening to him. He rose again as high as he could, and many volleys from this weapon flew in his direction. Mo Feng immediately jumped as high as he could, and while turning over, began firing his cannon. There was another powerful explosion and many volleys flew towards the powerful cannon. Chuzichin began to worry, thinking that this was likely the end. As soon as the flying targets touched the ground, the test would fail. The guys discussed what to do here and whether it was possible to break through all this barrage. Everyone unanimously decided that this was a clear failure. The boy, looking ahead, noticed a temporary blind spot and decided that he had made it just in time and it was time to finish. He pulled out his weapon and with a sharp movement of his hand pointed it towards the cannon. A bright golden lightning flashed towards the man who was driving this weapon. He barely dodged, and the blow was too strong for him from the main character. The village elder couldn't figure out how the bullet had just changed direction. Had it really just arced around the gun mount and hit the shooter in the back? The main character found himself right on top of the combat vehicle and did not let go of his weapon. He was actually standing at the very top and looking at the target circling above his head. Marco Polo, surprised, said that this was the same thing he had felt the last time. He called the man mysterious and asked him to act. Before us rises a large, spacious North American school. Landry Parker thought it was a test of fire rate, accuracy, and physical endurance. Surely an expert could survive that madness. Well, what just happened, and the appearance of so many flying targets immediately after, would simply break a person's spirit. Not to mention a person, something like that would take even a robot. The main character continued to fight and shoot at targets, looking carefully ahead. Again and again, powerful explosions occurred, and bright lightning illuminated everything around. The targets, one after another, exploded from the powerful shots of the boy who did not give up. The guys watching this started counting how many targets were still left, rooting for him. The boys started shouting and waving their arms joyfully that he'd done it. One of them almost went blind from all those rays. The designer of dizziness probably has no conscience at all. Meanwhile, Mo Feng turned his head toward the system. The system indicated that the task was completed, and he, satisfied, began to return to the source. The time spent on all this was only 1 minute 58 seconds. The system congratulated the anonymous fighter who activated the hidden sea level and successfully completed it at 120% difficulty, receiving his first high-ranking rating. Those who watched what was happening were very surprised. Could something like this happen in exercises? And what kind of level did this guy have? Joe Zichin thought that there were no accidents and that the entire ordeal had been even more terrifying than they had witnessed. And what was also obvious was that this man was very good at more than just shooting. The headmistress also exclaimed that it was amazing. She might have been able to keep up at the beginning, but what happened towards the end was clearly beyond her capabilities. Most likely, this is someone with EM points above 2,000. The difference is too great with those who have less than 2,000. Mofeng said he could actually finish it faster, but there was no need. Federal tests are given special attention when designing. But for Origin, you could have gotten a maximum of 10 points just now. His result was somewhere around 7 or 8. The thing is, he wasn't particularly excited by the test. In his past life, the aliens had these things called poison flies. They were far more vile, possessing high flight speeds and deadly poisonous stings. When they came into contact with a human body, they would instantly drill a hole in it. And when they gathered in groups, they could only be dealt with using a flamethrower. However, in the 3rd year of the war, they underwent a change and became immune to fire. The ability to evolve in aliens is truly something beyond imagination. The boy grabbed his head with his hand and said that he had enough of looking back into the past and that he was going to stop the war. In his case, the best outcome is not to go around and cut off the roots of others, because if the war starts again, no matter how people fight, the outcome will be the same as last time. Even if 2 major battles are won, humanity will inevitably suffer enormous losses and will likely be unable to completely destroy the alien race. After all, no one knows where they came from. Mo Feng, a certain student ID, was awarded a special bonus of 300 points for originating a hidden level. The boy exclaimed that it was a great joy. He'd worked a little harder and earned extra points, and that was motivation to keep going. He decided to run as quickly as possible because dinner does not tolerate delays and it's high time to treat himself to food. Before us rises a wide, beautiful cavalry school, and people with tablets in their hands sat at the table, and one of them said that he was quite pleased with the school team selected this time. He just wanted to say when the next competition will be and what will happen next. Suddenly, a man entered the room and told Rector Morris that he thought he needed to see it urgently. The man decided that he was clearly an idiot, because it was very impolite to interrupt an important meeting like that. He asked if it was fake and how such a rank rating could exist. Where was this student? What had happened? And where did he get this? He wanted to know everything about this student. In front of us is a strategic laboratory in Central Europe, and a girl approaches Dr. Calisaden, greeting him. Before she could say hello, he turned around and said that he didn't care who she was, and that he hoped she had something important. Otherwise, she would have to pay for wasting his precious time. The woman told the doctor she was talking about his recent research topic and that someone had confirmed it. The man looked at her in surprise and asked what she meant. Arc shooting. Then the doctor raised his glasses and looked at her even more closely, and the woman explained that at the present time his identity had not yet been established. Meanwhile, the fat man had already found himself next to his friend and was approaching the computer. He was very pleased and exclaimed that he was Lulu, and today, he would shoot them with love. Does he really like her that much, and did he even complete his training quotas today? Lei was inspired and exclaimed that he'd done it, and it wasn't that hard. He just has no taste, so he doesn't understand Lulu's world. He's quite talented, even overly so. Mo Feng decided that the training tasks he set for him were far from easy, but he always managed to complete them. This only shows that this guy is an unusual lazybones and still has potential that can be exploited. In that case, he can't be shown mercy. The next morning, the main character approached his comrade very early and began to help him get up. Then he tied the tires to him again and he pulled, and the boy asked him to do it as quickly as possible. Then he lifted iron and the main character loaded him more and more with the heaviest exercises. After the fat man fell almost unconscious on the training ground, Mo Feng would finish their training. And here we are again in the cafeteria, where students gather for lunch. One of the students asked if this was the reincarnation of the hungry fat man. Mo Feng told the fat man that it seemed he'd already fully adapted to his previous training volume, so it was time to increase it. Lei told his brother that he was probably delusional and that they really were two idiots. The boy replied that yes, and there was some sense in it. Didn't he think that even though things had gotten harder lately, life had become more satisfying? The fat man took offense and said it was all hopeless. The village headman exclaimed that he was simply too lazy and that it could be corrected. She looked closely at the fat man and said that she felt it was her duty to look after him. Lei told the village chief that she really was a big-hearted person, but she just shouldn't pay attention to him. When the fat man saw the fork in her hand, he wondered if she was on a diet. The girl said that she had recently increased the volume of her training and said that she had reached 1,700 points. She asked how her comrades were doing. Had they forgotten their promise? Mo Feng thought that the EM had its own demarcation points, and the next demarcation was at 1,600. Then came the boundary of top-class experts with the EM 2000, which was where Sun Xiaorui was aiming. The boy approached the fat man and said that they already had almost 800 points each, so they would definitely take part, and asked the fat man to say at least something. The headmistress looked at the fat man and said that if he took part in the next competition, she would give him a limited edition figurine of Lulu traveling around the moon. Then the guy asked if he was talking about the Galaxy series, which was released in a print run of only 99 copies. But this is impossible, and where could Sun Xiaorui get such a cool thing? He really didn't believe it, and, deep in thought, approached the girl as quickly as possible. He asked the village headwoman to be sure the tasks would be completed. Mo Feng decided it was useless to try to persuade this young man with words, and would have to either intimidate or bribe him. The girls asked these two why they were again in the back rows. The headman, looking at them, thought that these two were again planning to sneak into lectures. Mo Feng mentioned that quite a few people had come to today's class. Lei replied that this was indeed the case, and that the teacher was simply quite engaging, and he even found it difficult to fall asleep during his lectures. They couldn't understand what was happening to the professor today, and everyone started thinking about it. Maybe he decided to play a joke before entering. There was already such a version. The professor was already standing near the board and was drawing something on it with his chalk, looking at the audience. The guys were saying it was really cool and that they'd be reviewing that guy's performance yesterday at today's class. Don't they still know he got a high grade yesterday? The professor began to explain that some students might have already seen this and had not been able to sleep well the night before. He explained that if anyone hadn't seen it yet, it was okay, and he asked them to watch it again. Even after watching this video recording many times, the headman still experiences terrible shock. The guy thought that with each viewing, it seemed to him as if it was completely different from the previous one. Just when he starts to think he has it all figured out, he discovers that he was actually blind. The professor said that not long ago, a mysterious man appeared who showed off his high-ranking performance on the battlefield of Mars with a magnificent fireworks display. After yesterday's playthrough, it's clear that fighters who achieve such a high score anywhere have the opportunity to complete challenges at 120% difficulty. Furthermore, this is the highest difficulty in the system, and the first time they launched it, the person was able to achieve record-breaking results. He wants to say that this test demonstrated many fighting skills that are not currently available, and some improved fighting skills, and he would say that this recording is something like a student for remote training of fighters. Some might think this is an exaggeration, but that's just the way it looks. The guy approached Sun Xiaorui and asked her to tell him what she thought about it. The head of the class stood up and told the professor that she had been in the EM building yesterday and had seen the live broadcast. She'd just watched that recording so many times, and there were still parts she couldn't understand. Then the professor asked her about it. Suddenly, a guy intervened and said that he had also watched it many times and was about to lose confidence in himself. The professor said that the two comrades he had just questioned had more than 1,600 points in EM, and their accuracy was at a level above 2,000. The guys shouted that this was too much, and that this anonymous instructor was probably posing as a student. The professor asked to be allowed to analyze everything from God's point of view. When he approached the board, he asked the children to listen and watch very carefully. The girls who were friends with the main character looked at the board very carefully. The professor began explaining that the so-called accurate assessment of suppressive fire occurs before the target's trajectory is fully expanded. Doing this with a single target is fairly simple, but when there are 10 of them at once, it's even more difficult. He asks who among those present can do this to raise their hand. What if we add interference in the form of sniper shots fired from behind the scenes? That is, repeating exactly what is on the recording is impossible. Next, they'll review hand positioning, shooting skills, and body movement and alignment. If anyone's interested, he asked that they remember to take notes. The head woman thought about how much detail there was, and how much just one small moment. Now she was beginning to understand just how powerful that man was. The village elder said that Buell's enhanced combination shooting, although he wasn't entirely sure if he had borrowed this particular shooting method, was a technique used for layering and changing flow lines, allowing a limited number of rounds to form an endless blockade. The time required for a target to fly for a certain period of time can be defined as being within a fixed range, which is why so-called absolute suppression is possible. This is the theory of Buell's shooting, and although it does not allow for such a large coverage of space, this man created an improved version of it with two pistols. Its complexity lies in shooting from both the left and right sides. Different rhythms, different judgments about how to coordinate the work of the brain and body and maintain an absolute hit rate. No matter how complex his movements, there's no hesitation in his eyes. His movements are swift and furious, but his gaze seems to be in slow motion. Frequency stepping is king when it comes to long-range combat. With such a stepping, transmission simply falls apart, and the reason is very simple: a change in acceleration, which creates an illusion of line of sight. But the difficulty lies in the training itself and how to force the body to adapt to these changes without negative consequences. At the same time, the hit rate remains the same despite these changes. The protagonist watched all this and thought that it obviously interested him greatly. If he continues to get carried away like this, the fat man will definitely wake up much earlier. The professor continued to talk about the arc shooting technique that fascinates countless people. While under heavy machine gun fire and limited in both space and time, he fired an incomprehensible shot. Of course, some fighters have done this by accident, so major schools have been studying its feasibility for some time. But this man did it easily, and he was already shooting as if he were used to it. He just can't believe that such a shot straight to the head was just an accident. And also, regarding his use of blind shooting, he would dare to say that no more than 10 people were able to achieve a similar level both on Earth and on the Moon. But the coolest thing here isn't the arc and blind shooting. His final move is 100 times more difficult than the arc shooting technique, which is why he called it a god. Now he will reveal the truth to them, and they will watch that moment in 50-fold slow motion. These 100 flying targets are divided into 10 groups. They are not used for training soldiers and are a simplified version of a new type of group attack method developed by the military. This method prevents 10 groups from engaging in suppressive fire against enemy snipers. The designer of this level did not intend for it to be passable from the very beginning, as he created it to test not just one person, but an entire team. One of the participants said he hoped to run into him at the competition, and another asked how they could even fight him. It was completely pointless, and they could only hope this man was their comrade. The professor asked them to stay positive and that he would explain the spiral shooting process further. They needed to study harder, and they would definitely make progress. Mo Fung thought about how he'd felt a sense of familiarity when he'd destroyed those flying targets. Thinking about it after Professor Zhou's analysis, it made him feel terrified. After all, during one of the battles on the battlefield of Mars, they encountered an attack by a group of flying alien species, and their method of attack was similar, very similar to this one. Do aliens really have some kind of relationship with people? The boy started coughing. He grabbed his chest with his hands and it started to hurt again. That's what it felt like. He was in much more pain than last time and he couldn't understand what was happening at all. The boy went to the mirror and began to undress, taking off his clothes as quickly as possible to look. He noticed another scar had appeared on his chest. Were these scars trying to tell him something? The first time it happened was when he thought Sun Xiaorui had died because of him. The second time was now, when he thought the flying alien's attack method was similar to the one during the EM test. They were trying to remind him of something. The protagonist began to sweat and decided that since it all came down to EM, he needed to speed up. If he could get to the core of the circle through EM, he would be able to receive more accurate and useful information. The boy approached the door and heard the boy talking about how he needed to be more energetic and how he needed to try harder. He decided that Lei would be able to achieve something, and it was rare that he was so lively. One of the kids said that Professor Zhuang had dragged out the lesson again, but it was very interesting. Lei wondered if this warrior was practically a god, and wondered if he would even show up at this EM competition. If he trained hard, he could definitely catch up. The girl said that she needed to take something, so she asked the headman to go without her, and they said goodbye. The head woman immediately approached her comrades and asked them to wait for her so they could go for a walk together today. The fat man noticed that she'd been paying them too much attention lately. The girl noticed and asked if he had any problems, to which the fat man replied that there were no problems and everything was fine. Then she decided to turn to the main character and said that she noticed that the shooting technique of that mysterious man was somewhat similar to the way he shot that day at the shooting range. Mo Feng replied that he was indeed the mysterious man from the rumors and would give them a chance, so he asked them to hurry up and try to please him. Lei asked his brother to stop, as everyone knew he specialized in hand-to-hand combat. The village elder told the boy that he had been doing quite well lately, working hard, but close combat fighters were easy targets, so he should improve his ranged combat skills. Mo Feng replied that the commander's orders would definitely be carried out and told the fat man he had no intention of holding him back. Lei smiled and told his brother that, frankly, he was usually not serious. The head woman smiled, looked at the fat man and said that then she would wait until he became serious. The protagonist thought the fat man in the future really was at that level. Although, if you look at shooting technique alone, he was much better. The guys in the cafeteria were talking about how the Far North School had already begun conducting target simulation battles. So they were silently admitting that one of the schools would have lethal weapons and therefore decided to step up their preparations for the EM competition. They're so serious and their progress isn't good enough. One of the guys said he heard the mysterious man was probably from Earth. The class president exclaimed that the cafeteria was buzzing about that mysterious man and that they too should put more effort into the competition. The fat man exclaimed, raising his hands, that he was already full of energy. Meanwhile, the main character was already approaching a certain place and began to think that there was probably literature on the topic of space and time here. In just 200 years, humanity has developed so much that it has completely transformed the moon, begun to explore Mars, and sent interstellar expeditions. It is imperative to mention the key figure of Doctor of Sciences Leonardo da Vinci, who put forward the theory of the curvature of flight and led the optimization of genes, which helped human civilization make a leap forward at least 100 years. There's no doubt he's a greater scientist than even Einstein, and whether on Earth or the moon, he's personified as a god, though on the moon this is much more pronounced. The Da Vinci family is also the largest on the moon, and for them, there's no such thing as wealth that isn't passed down to the third generation. Over the past 2 centuries, many talented people have emerged from their lineage, all of whom have become leaders in politics, economics, and the military of the moon. Incidentally, this great scientist devoted the last stages of his life to the study of space and time, and thanks to his research, people achieved long-term progress in space physics and even made a huge breakthrough in space technology. Understanding wormholes has also made progress. But the most difficult question in time management remains whether time is in 4 dimensions or a higher dimension. But in higher dimensions, time is irreversible and, most importantly, a person is a part of the universe. With the technology they have, it's impossible to create an environment suitable for this. But space has already given a hint, and the wormhole in the center of the wormhole is a world beyond 4 dimensions. Only when its foundation is lost will the extremely fragile spirit dissipate in an instant. During this time, the movement of unconventional physical concepts becomes possible. So-called coordinates are essentially the most attractive point in a long river of time. Da Vinci believed that the coordinates with the highest chance of success are still a moment in time in the past, present, and future of an object. In this case, it will be easier for the spirit to enter the body and no rejection reaction will arise, and this is most likely where this incredible spatial movement will end. Something that has disappeared cannot reappear, and let's say he died in that time and space, so he will not be resurrected. But if he prevents an alien invasion in this time and space, the situation in the future will change. Joe appeared before him and asked if he was also interested in this. The boy replied that he was interested and simply flipped through it. Then the girl remarked that excessive modesty could be mistaken for arrogance. In fact, he'd been reading this book for over an hour now. Mo Feng asked the girl if she believed in the possibility of returning to the past. Zhou Zichen explained that instead of dwelling on the past, she prefers to look to the future. Incidentally, she heard from her sister, Xiao Rui, that he was also planning to compete, and she wanted to practice this weekend. The girl asked if he wanted to join, and the boy thought that he was only supposed to act as a cover, and why this invitation all of a sudden. Zhou Zichen asked him not to misunderstand her, and this request, along with Xiao Xing's recent troubles, was also a source of concern. The boy replied that he too was open to learning from each other. He thought to himself that he really had an itch lately, and Zhou Zichen was considered #1 in the Dragon Script School. Then the girl became happy and turned around and said goodbye to him, saying that they would meet on Saturday and asking him to try. Mo Feng thought that he hadn't found anything else all night, and despite the results, he would most likely encounter some astonishing conspiracies in the future. It seems to him more and more as if the appearance of strangers is connected with people. The boy decided to go and stubbornly fixate on one thing, and that's not entirely good either. And so, the end of the week arrived. Lei told the protagonist that it was really cool and the class leader had actually bought him a limited edition figurine. Mo Feng replied that that was probably why he'd been working hard to get 800 points. The fat man exclaimed that there was a group event for the Lulu fan club this Saturday. He wanted to show off the figurine there as soon as possible. The main character smiled and asked the old man to come to their house for dinner in this case, and he immediately agreed, delighted by this. In front of us is a special club training ground spacious and beautiful. Zhou Zichen was already there and smiled and noticed that Mo Feng had arrived after all. She asked if he would wait a minute because she wanted to try another combination of punches, and the boy immediately agreed. He remarked that he hadn't even thought she would come here so early. Zhou Zichen replied that it went without saying. It was necessary to prepare for sparring with him, and then the projection of models begins. Before she could finish speaking, she stood up straight and spread her arms out to the sides. Her gaze was very serious and persistent. For one moment, the girl closed her eyes and then suddenly opened them. She concentrated and began to perform various techniques and was already approaching the enemy. She made a high jump and found herself next to her target, looking into its eyes. Then the girl made a powerful kick with her leg, knocking the opponent as far back as possible. When the enemy flew back, the girl returned to her stance, rising to her feet. The protagonist thought that she was truly an outstanding student representative. In her movements, she always leaves herself room for maneuver, and each of her movements is connected to the previous one. This way, she ensures her own safety and at the same time increases her lethal force, and this is already micro-control by top-level experts. The girl continued to train very hard and finally she finished this training. Mo Feng stood in front of her and said that she should treat the training as a real battle, which was expected of the #1 of the Dragon Letter School. The girl lowered her head and said that he saw right through her, and it seemed he was pretending to be a pig eating a tiger. And she said that it couldn't be that brother Mo Xiaoxing could be so untalented. Then the boy, holding his head in his hands, asked if it was bad, and the girl answered the question with a question about what he himself thought about it. They turned their backs to each other and Zhou Zichen said that if he pretended for too long, he would forget his tiger nature. Before the competition, she will conduct targeted joint training with him. She is confident that if he tries hard with his shooting, he will have every chance of making it to the second round. Then how about an official match? 3 rounds to 2 wins. The girl immediately looked him in the eye with interest and a smile. She asked if he was sure of it, although she didn't know where this confidence came from. But she always fought seriously, so then she asked him not to blame her for the consequences. The protagonist smiled and exclaimed that it was all nonsense and that she didn't think he could withstand the blow. The only blow he had barely survived was the failure of his first confession. He looked at the girl again and said that since she was going to be serious, then how about a big bet? If he wins, she'll come over for dinner tomorrow. His mom has been pestering him for 18 days since her last visit, and his fat friend will be there too. Then the girl asked if he'd said everything, and the boy asked in response what else she wanted, or if she was planning to become his girlfriend if she won. Jo Zichin smiled and said that she wouldn't mind trying her uncle's cooking again, so she would make an allowance. If he wins even one round, he can consider himself a winner. Even if he loses all three, he'll continue to be her shield for a while. Only she asked him to do his duty properly and in no case to be lazy, after which the boy showed his class. And now a little time has passed and in front of us is a real arena where a guy and a girl were standing. Jo Zichin stood in front of the protagonist and said that he could take any weapon and she didn't care. The boy thought to himself that the training weapons were not sharpened, but even so they posed a considerable danger. It's still better not to take a weapon, even if it's blunt. It's easy to cause problems with it. Mo Feng firmly decided and told the girl that he would fight with his bare hands. She was very surprised and looked closely at her opponent. Jo Zichin decided in this case that she would look into where such confidence and arrogance came from. And so, before the battle, they stood opposite each other, looking seriously into each other's eyes. They were supposed to have a serious and interesting battle, and the guys were ready for it. The girl rose as high as possible above the protagonist's head and brought her leg closer to him. She was already very close and wanted to kick the boy when he suddenly tried to strike her with his hand. He pushed her away and she jumped far back to protect herself from danger. Jo Zichin thought that although the strike just now was only made with 70% of its strength, the counterattack was completely sudden and he also used a shoulder swing. He just hit randomly out of surprise. Did he really just swing crookedly and hit straight? Mo Feng is known for his thick-headedness. Perhaps she should attack more aggressively. Mo Feng raised his hand up and told the girl that their score was 1-0 and they would fight again. He asked the girl to act and she began to run up to deliver another blow. She was already close to the boy and put her hand in front of herself, after which the girl turned over in the air and tried to kick. But before she could do anything, he grabbed her leg and flipped her over. Mo Feng announced that the count was now 2-0. He advised Jo Zichin to understand herself during training and, in combat, to focus on studying her opponent. Avoid thinking of them as a simulated projection, incapable of instantaneous response. The girl thought that she had never felt anything like this before, and didn't even know why she was losing and why at that moment she felt as if her opponent had disappeared. But the moment Mo Feng grabbed her, she felt as if her body had gone numb. She'd never been in such a situation before, and she felt a sense of calm. It was the first time she'd experienced such a thing. The protagonist looked at her carefully, and since she lost, she had to pay, although it was still difficult to come to terms with it. The girl said that she couldn't help but admit that at the moment he was better than her. Jo Zichin smiled, closed her eyes, and told the elder that she had indeed lost. But the boy replied that it wasn't over yet. Since they'd agreed on 3 rounds, no matter the outcome, they had to finish. The girl replied that then she would not refuse, and only this time she would use a weapon. She actually chose a weapon and took the sharp long sword into her hands. She began to approach as quickly as possible and was already very close to the enemy. The atmosphere instantly changed and she immediately brought her state into order. To be able to consciously bring oneself to such a state in such an enraged environment is truly a rarity, as one would expect from Jo Zichin. The girl had already approached him, and holding out her weapon asked him to give her instructions. Mo Feng also extended his hand forward and asked the girl to act as quickly as possible. He beckoned to her, and she began to approach faster and faster to deliver another blow. She jumped as high as she could and, coming closer, tried to hit the boy with her sword. But he dodged it very deftly, jumping over her head and dodging the sword. He noticed that Jo Zichin had completely blocked the direction of movement, but as long as she couldn't get through, it was completely useless. The girl also thought that he had dodged, and that she still lacked speed. The moment he landed was her only chance in this situation, and so she jumped as high as possible above the opponent's head and tried to strike. The guys watched what was happening and supported the goddess, who had truly trained the ultimate move. The boy continued to watch his opponent, whom he deftly dodged. She jumped again as high as she could and tried to deliver a powerful blow with her sword. But the main character did not give up, and with a smile approached the girl who wanted to hit him. He instantly grabbed her hand, which held a sharp metal blade. He made a move and tore the blade from her hand with just one easy movement. When the boy approached her, he asked her not to practice this anymore. It will lead to nothing but death on the battlefield, so you shouldn't do it. The fight continued, and the main character, with a very deft movement, grabbed his opponent's weapon. He said, looking into her eyes, that their score was 3-0. Perhaps he overdid it a bit in the end, and he apologizes for that. Zhou Zichen realized that she had worked so hard to learn an ultimate level skill, yet he had so easily reflected it. Although she is not in the top 10 in terms of hand-to-hand combat, she still has a level of around 2,000 points. The girl couldn't understand how this had happened and lowered her head. Mo Feng thought about how stupid he'd been again, and why he'd fought with the girl like that, even if it had made sense. It was an old bad habit of his, and after all these years he was now a little lacking in common sense. He approached Zhou Zichen and told her he was just lucky. Maybe she wasn't in good shape, or maybe he was just too eager for her to dine with them. And was she sure she hadn't given in to him on purpose? The girl asked me not to try to change the subject, and she's in good shape today. She might not be that strong in hand-to-hand combat, but not so strong that she'd lose by such a wide margin. She had never seen anyone stop 100 cuts in an acrylic coil with their bare hands, and how they even did it. Mo Feng sighed and said he didn't recall anything like that. The girl replied that she remembered everything perfectly well, and he had just said that it would lead to nothing but death. Then she asked if he even knew that this was an ultimate level skill that could win any EM competition group. The boy coughed and said she could only imagine how grueling this move was. As soon as she uses it, her alertness drops. And what if she's being guarded by snipers? What if there are a lot of enemies and she's mortally tired? People from the crowd shouted and asked the elder what was best to wear for dinner, asking him not to rush. But the boy didn't pay attention to anyone and looked into Zhou Zichen's eyes with a smile. She wondered what kind of gifts her aunt and uncle liked. This time it would be more formal, and she hoped he'd be more talkative tomorrow. The guys were chatting behind their backs, asking if he was really her boyfriend and if he wasn't just an excuse. After all, they'd just been sparring, and he'd probably been groping her little arms and feeling her legs. Mo Feng also wondered if he really was just a shield for her. It would be nice if the joke turned out to be true. And so, Sunday, the day off, arrived. The woman asked the boys to have a snack for now and said the main course would be ready later. The sister asked her brother to tell her everything frankly, and what kind of intoxicating potion he had given to his sister, Zhou Zichen. Why did he invite that parasite? He had already eaten all the rice in the house. Lei told Xiaoxing that if she kept being so sarcastic, no one would marry her. After all, he was her fat older brother. She couldn't be any more polite. Although she was being factual, how could she be so petty? The fat man asked his brother how he'd actually done it. After all, Junior Joe had rejected him, and how had he achieved his goal? The girl said he'd misunderstood and that she hadn't come today to meet Mo Feng's parents. They'd simply placed a bet and she'd lost. How could that be, given her brother's abilities? She told Sister Zhou Zichen that she shouldn't have lost to him on purpose. The fat man thought his brother was poor and wondered if his sister was really his own. Zhou Zichen said that it wasn't like that at all, and that she'd tried her best. But she didn't even feel like she could have won any of the 3 rounds. She asked the boy to say something. She thought about how yesterday she had looked through the best EM recordings of recent times, and even after a thorough analysis, she had not found anyone with the same movement pattern and techniques as Mo Feng. Xiaoxing walked up to the boy and said, touching his face, that it didn't look like a mask made of human skin, so she would ask a question next. She will ask Comrade Mo Feng to answer seriously, because if he makes a mistake, he will either be sent to a military tribunal or to the lab for an autopsy. She fell into the water when she was 7 years old and wanted to know who saved her, and he had to answer in 3 seconds. The boy replied that she wasn't 7, but 5, and she already knew how to swim. When his sister started asking other questions, he started making excuses and said she was asking for trouble. Xiaoxing exclaimed angrily that her brother was threatening her and that he would be left without food today. He seems like a real brother, but he can't be that cool. She told the fat guy that she and her brother were wearing the same pair of pants. And didn't he notice anything strange? After a failed love affair, the brother began training diligently. The prodigal son finally returned, and having come to his senses, he embarked on the righteous path. The boy asked him to stop, since they hadn't gathered today to criticize him. He also asked the fat man not to use idioms indiscriminately. Zhou Zichen also turned to the protagonist and said that she had already thought about what he said yesterday and thought it made sense. 100 cuts through the acrylic coil were very costly, but in duels she should be very effective, and he somehow managed to interrupt her, and she doesn't think that something like this could happen by accident. The boy replied with a smile that, in fact, as soon as this reception begins, it is already full of holes. If she really focused, she could easily find a tempo where her hand would be faster than her opponent's. Xiaoxing looked at her brother in surprise and said he was forgetting the most important thing. So this isn't even funny and stop throwing dust in his eyes. Otherwise, she will tell mom that he is bullying Joe Zichin's sister. Explaining it in words was too much trouble, so he decided to just show it. Knife speed is quite important, but speed alone isn't necessarily effective. Finding the right tempo is key, and tempo is paramount. When the boy demonstrated extraordinary speed in front of the guys, they were simply shocked. In cutting techniques, the swing is important, but in the spiral cutting technique, it is too large, resulting in ordinary chopping strikes. However, in battles, brute force is not as important as technique and its details. Sometimes, slowness helps achieve greater limits. When the boys watched the main character, they couldn't understand what was going on with that speed. Chu Zichin noticed many cuts, 13 of which were angled and required a slowdown. But all the strikes merged and the slowdown was not felt at all. I thought about that too, because the cuts weren't interrupted, just the tempo changed. Xiaoxing looked at the boy and said that now she doubted he was her brother again. The main character said that she shouldn't doubt him. He was her brother, and he had simply returned from the future. The sister kicked him again and asked him to stop talking nonsense. Their conversation was interrupted by their parents, who asked them to come to the table. They could eat first, and then talk in peace. The protagonist's father asked student Joe Zichin to eat as much as she could without being shy. Her mother, however, asked her to try the stewed chicken with chestnuts. They also offered her some stewed sea cucumbers with leeks. The girl immediately thanked her parents for their hospitality. The woman asked Joe Zichin to tell her aunt the truth and what such a good girl like her saw in their son. Mo Feng wondered how he was so bad in their eyes. He asked them to stop embarrassing the girl and, in general, how they could doubt their son so much. And so, this wonderful dinner came to an end and the boys began to go outside. Joe Zichin told the boy that he truly loved his family very much. Then he asked if this was typical for everyone, and the girl replied that he himself did not pay attention to his own gaze. She thought that this look was not that of a bright young guy, but rather of a mature man who had experienced a lot. Previously, he had the opposite attitude, youthfulness and mischief. Sometimes he even behaved very strangely. Perhaps these are his ways of expressing himself, and he has one model of behavior when he is on the street, and another when he is with his family. Mo Feng laughed and asked if she was serious. Girls liked that sort of thing after all, and maybe he should pretend to be more thoughtful in the future. Joe Zichin said that her car was already nearby and he could go back home. He better hurry before Xiaoxing tortured the fat man to death. The boy replied that Xiaoxing had told him to accompany her directly to the car and that she wouldn't let him go home otherwise. He asked if she could call a car directly there. The girl replied that she would go thank her aunt and uncle for their warm welcome on her behalf, and then they would see each other next week. The main character immediately smiled at the girl and waved goodbye until next week. Now that he thinks about it, he feels like Joe Zichin's refusal in his previous life was correct. Meanwhile, the girl looked in the mirror, watching the boy go, and also thought that lately there was always a trace of inexpressible sadness in his smile. Mo Feng was probably hiding something from them. The boy also began to think that, although she was inevitably attracted to him, he now had to restrain himself, and not only because his future was full of dangers. He would not want to cause more pain to the people around him, and even if it cannot be avoided, he will look at this world with a smile, no matter who is in front of him, his family, Zhang Wulei, Sun Xiaorui, or Zhou Zichin. Before us is the Central Intelligence Agency of the Earth Federation, namely the meeting room of the EM Organizing Committee. Didn't they initially say the distribution plan would be based on quotas, but why did they now change it to performance-based? This is completely unacceptable, and they've already invested heavily. Parliament would never make such a decision. By the way, the Ministry of War is to blame for the people from the moon looking down on them. The man said he was a member of Parliament, so he'd stop trying to shift the blame and maybe they could help them with something practical. Then the man asked to calm down for Luna on this very good basis, and this is a plan for appointing the best fighters of humanity. This is an epical step for all of humanity. The desire to witness it is completely understandable, but it cannot be allowed to interfere with this plan. Although genetic modification was discovered on the Moon and Earth simultaneously due to its radical nature, the Moon achieved greater results. Now that the Moon has surpassed the Earth in all respects, the Earth Federation is constantly losing its right to vote when making decisions on many common issues. If they fail in the EM this time, their shame will lead to a widening of the gap. The woman approached the General Marshal and asked if he was confident in the candidates recommended by the War Ministry. The man replied that one could only hope that they would do their best, but that there were still strict age restrictions. Another said that surrendering without a fight was a complete last resort. But the point is, starting a fight would be even more shameful than they could imagine. Of course, the level of their top 50 is much different from theirs. But he wouldn't say there's no chance at all, and there's always uncertainty in battle. The girl asked why they were hoping for luck again. The general marshal paused again, wondering if this time the EM affected too many things, not just prestige. But the most important thing was that the influence of the two great federations was tied to the selection of candidates for the main stage. The one-eyed guy exclaimed that they had to face the truth and that they had no way out. The man told General Gu that this was the best method, and that they'd been using it for so many years. There was no better option. General Gu exclaimed that simply waiting for death was absolutely unacceptable, and that they needed to try a new selection model on EM. Then, one of the boys told General Gu that his words were not supported by anything, and he knew that the academic performance in Asia, for which he was responsible, was not entirely satisfactory. The guys started talking about how using the new method was risky, and the Ministry of War could not afford it. Finally, the meeting ended, and after it, General Gu sat alone in his chair. Luna has been acting strangely for the past few years, but although intelligence agencies investigated, they found no leads. The officer asked the general why he hadn't shown the recording. General Gu explained that he needed protection, not exposure, and that it wouldn't ease the pressure on them. He would leave the matter to him. Then the man thought, after all, this young man gives the Earth Federation, albeit a small amount of hope. It's hard to say what this boy will achieve. However, it still seems to him that the fact that among 4 people there must be at least 1 talent of land is a problem. They will fight for the honor of themselves and their home planet, and today the number of places in the EM competition was officially announced. But only 58 of them will qualify for the finals in the capital of the moon. So there is no doubt that the competition will be fierce. EM 800 is the minimum for participation in the selection. But to reach the final, this is clearly not enough, and this time the selection method was adjusted. The first stage of the selection begins with the top 10 teams, based on the total number of EM points, receiving direct entry to the final. Needless to say, the top 10 in EM points represent the highest level of the current Earth Federation, and are at least fairly stable. As for special recommendations, they are intended for those who possess great strength, but for some reason cannot participate in the selection. If no candidates are listed after this, the second stage of the selection process, the qualifying competition, will begin. Fighters with an EM score above 1,600 or who received an A rating in the trials will participate. Mo Feng realized that he hadn't seen the point of this new selection before, but now the selection not only guarantees basic combat effectiveness, but also takes into account those fighters who don't like to advance in the demarcations, but have sufficient strength. In the divisions, it is mainly fighters with a balanced fighting range who advance, but in reality, there are fighters who are extremely strong in only one discipline. It seems there is something strange about these EM competitions, and perhaps it is in them that he will find the key to returning from the future. Zhou Zichen raised her hand when she saw the elder Mo Feng and asked him to sit next to her. The headwoman remarked that it was surprising that they could eat, although that could be said to be the only thing they were good at. Lei explained that without food there would be no strength, and recently he had been training so much with Brother Feng that he was completely starving. They thought that at this EM competition, Zhou Zichen is supposed to go straight to the finals, but she is ranked 8th in the top, which is the highest in the Dragon Script School. She scored over 1,800 points and has A-level grades, so she should be eligible to participate in the qualifying competition. It's unlikely there will be more than 3 people with special recommendations. The organizing committee and the Ministry of Defense should understand this. Even if she were recommended as such, she doesn't think she'll be able to prevail over the key figures on the moon. The main character also thought about it and asked the headman not to worry so much. It would be better to eat because she would definitely succeed. Sun Xiaorui had excelled in the EM Elite competition in his previous life, and he and Zhou Zichen had become an incomparable pair of blossoms that led the Dragon Script School to a revival. Sun Xiaorui told Mo Feng that he looked like she was dying. She asked him not to be upset because even though they might not qualify this time, they still managed to achieve 800 points, proving their potential. She asked not to worry, and when she becomes captain, she will definitely hire the 2 of them as her assistants. Zhu Zichen told the boy that Sister Xiaorui had a point. With his strength, he would definitely have a chance. The village chief wondered how she knew how strong he was. The girl explained that she had sparred with Elder Mo Feng over the weekend, and that he had extraordinary close combat skills. The protagonist exclaimed that it was true, but in fact he was going to become the winner of the EM competition. Then the boys suddenly asked Mo Feng if he would die if he bragged. Neither they nor anyone else had ever seen this skill of his. The guy who said this turned to Xiao Rui and asked her to forget about him, because this guy should take care of himself. Another guy asked his daughter-in-law to pay attention to Brother Min before he committed suicide out of grief. The headmistress asked him to stop making a mess, and for Min not to say she wasn't giving him a chance. If he could make it to the finals, she would become his girlfriend. She vouched for her words. Min began to worry because he stopped at 1,560 points and could not rise further. He told Xiao Rui that he knew he didn't deserve her, but Mo Feng was much worse than him, and he couldn't accept it. That guy wasn't as handsome as him, and his grades were poor. The guys who listened to this guy told the daughter-in-law that this is true and he is not worth it. They advised him to accept Brother Ming's feelings. The protagonist placed a calming hand on his comrade's shoulder. He'd encountered Ming several times already, and each time it had been under strange circumstances. Whether Sun Xiaorui liked him or not was none of his business, but as the village chief's friend, he'd better stay away from him. It's just that during the battles on Mars, this guy fought bravely as the captain of one of the squads. During an important battle, he could have retreated, but because all his team members died, he did not want to return alone and, having activated a small nuclear bomb, exploded along with the aliens. It was said that he had a special affection for Sun Xiaorui from the beginning to the very end. Min began to approach the main character and asked why he was looking at him. If he was a man, then let him go one-on-one. Zhou Zichen exclaimed that it seemed they'd misunderstood something, and that the elder Mo Feng was her boyfriend. Sun Xiaorui and he were just good friends, and if the girl didn't want a relationship, then there was no point in pestering her. Ming explained to the younger Zhou Zichen that this Mo Feng was using some low-class tricks. If so, let's say she just said something, and they'd break all three of his legs. Suddenly, William appeared in front of them and said that this was the dining room and Min should behave a little more modestly. Min turned towards the guy and saw William in front of him, who was serious, and approached the guys. He told Zhou Zichen that this game was unnecessary and that he understood that all her energy was currently focused on EM. He asked her to wait until the finals were over, and then they would have a proper talk about the future. Min asked who he was, whether he was a general or a ship's commander. Maybe he'd better stop putting on airs in front of them. Zhou Zichen turned to William and said that she had no obligation to explain the relationship between her and Mo Feng to him. The protagonist told his mentor brother, William, that he hoped he wouldn't be chasing women in the future, and he was a soldier after all. Surely he should have at least some fortitude. He thought about how this William had fled alone during a major battle, leaving his positions and comrades behind. He had never been court-martialed, even though he had left the service. Ming smiled and told Mo Feng that he was so careless to say such things to William and what kind of mess this was. William asked if he was circling around women and if he had at least earned the right to participate in the qualifying competition, unlike Mo Feng. Sun Xiaorui asked him not to go too far. Then the boy remarked again that Mo Feng was only good at hiding behind women's backs. Mo Feng replied that he really wouldn't participate in the qualifying round. The boy then replied that, of course, by the time he had enough strength to participate, pigs would learn to fly. Mo Feng said that he didn't know what was going on with the pigs, but he had plans to participate in the finals. William was very surprised that the boy was going to reach the final. The head girl thought to herself that what he had just said was no joke. One of the guys asked if he heard correctly that Mo Feng was going to participate in the finals. The second one asked to roll his lip and wonder if he really hoped to make it to the finals. He clearly had too much pork soup. When the boy pressed the button, William grimaced, thinking that this was simply impossible. This really was a right to participate in the EM finals. How could that be? He put in so much effort, but ultimately only got the chance to participate in the qualifying competition, while this outcast was able to go straight to the finals. The boy asked if they had seen enough, and he hoped that he had satisfied their curiosity. Zhou Zichen turned to the boys and asked why they were frozen, since there was nothing left to look at. The boy screamed in pain and told the headman that she would soon leave him without a leg. Sun Xiaorui approached him and asked why he'd hidden the news that he'd qualified for the finals immediately, or that he'd decided to rebel. Mo Feng replied that he wouldn't dare, and that he'd only just received the notification. By the way, they were also supposed to receive it, and Zhou Zichen immediately congratulated the elder, because it looks like they will fight together. The fat man coughed and told the headman that he had to admit that he too had earned the right to participate in the qualifying competition. The guys were very surprised that a fat pig who watches anime all day long and constantly gets low marks got into the qualifying rounds. Suddenly, they heard an announcement, and all four of them were asked to report immediately to the rector's office. They also want to share the good news that their students Zhou Zichen and Mo Feng have qualified directly for the finals. The remaining four will participate in the qualifying competition. The guy clenched his fists and exclaimed that this was great, and it looked like everything turned out as he thought. In front of us is the rector's office, and the guys were just going inside. He thought they only had two promising talents, but who would have thought such a surprise was in store for him? And most importantly, two students from their school advanced directly to the finals, something he could only dream of. The rector turned to Zhou Zichen and Mo Feng, but after all, they were the two of them, the pride of their school, and he really hoped that they would not become arrogant and show excessive haste. He asked them to strive to achieve the best results not only for themselves and the school, but for all Earthlings as a whole. He'd previously heard that the main character had a bad reputation, but now he's earned a direct entry into the finals, and that's simply amazing. The guys immediately saluted the rector and said that they would try their best. During his training in his previous life, Mo Feng considered him an incompetent bureaucrat who, by constantly smoothing over rough edges, was gradually leading the Dragon Script School to decline. There was no one on the battlefield of Mars who didn't know his name. The local battles he commanded there were the most outstanding, and he also led the most attacks on the front lines. Unfortunately, Wang Zhenyang couldn't hold out to the end, but he didn't leave and did his best to buy time for the others to retreat. As a result, he died on the battlefield. It was thanks to his sacrifice that they all survived. The rector couldn't understand what was wrong with this boy's aura and why he seemed accustomed to the battlefield. And now he wants to address them. Even though they have made it to the qualifying competition, they should not take this lightly. This time, all the major schools will come out of their holes in droves, and we need to take the next competitions very seriously and show ourselves. William thought that he was just a sniper, incapable of cunning plans, and that his superiors were already looking for a replacement for him. One of the guys mentioned that he'd heard they'd both qualified to compete. The other replied that even if they did, they'd simply get beat up. They must have cheated. How else would that be even possible? And who knows, maybe they really are experts, so they need to keep their voices down. Suddenly, the boy's phone rang and his sister told her brother that it finally began to turn out that he was her own. Mo Feng asked if this was how one spoke to one's brother and why she even thought that he might not be her real brother. Xiaoxing asked how could she not doubt it. Considering her abilities, she found out that he began to change after he became close to his sister Zhou Zichen. The boy suddenly burst into tears and said that it seemed he couldn't help but succeed because of this girl. He asked the fat man not to be afraid either, and that he would definitely make it through the qualifying rounds. The fat man immediately told Mo Feng that it was simply impossible, and that getting into the qualifiers was his limit. Mo Feng said he was capable of achieving an A grade in his shooting and had a chance to qualify for the preliminary rounds. There were still a few days left before the official start of the group rounds, so he'd give it some practice. Then the boy explained that he would not only wake up early, but would also start living by training, because tomorrow he would be completely exhausted. Muscle injuries and broken bones will become the norm for him, so today he needs to spend every second enjoying himself. Since they had already finished talking, he went to the library. The boy thought that he was able to achieve an A grade thanks to the recording of that mysterious person. And also, he had learned a lot from shooting practice recently, and it must be Lulu's blessing. And so we return again to the Northern Library in which the main character sat alone at the table. The first wave of strikes during the alien invasion targeted the largest cities on the Moon and Earth. He knows nothing about this, but he can't believe it was an accident. At that time, there was a theory that the aliens simply chose densely populated areas for points A, which is quite logical. He is absolutely sure that they had a special reason for this, although he cannot yet say what it is. Looking at the materials currently available, he found practically nothing. From the very beginning, he didn't expect to find any immediate flaws. After all, it is then that he will gain access to a completely different level of information, and it would be nice to have an assistant with him. But unfortunately, he does not have people suitable for this role at the moment. The protagonist decided he'd had enough for today, as it was getting late. As he stepped outside, he heard a sound behind him. It was Marco Polo, who became curious about where he had disappeared to since he had just been here. Then the boy was already behind him and asked if he was looking for him. Marco Polo turned around and replied that no. He just suddenly had to pee. Lately, He kept feeling like someone was following him, and he wondered why. He asked her if the guy was from the Dragon script and asked her to tell him why she was following him until he beat him up. Marco Polo, frightened, said that since they were from the same school, maybe they could do without beatings. But the main character kicked him near the head and said that he had a bad character, and he asked to tell him the reason. Then Marco Polo asked if he really was the anonymous man. Mo Feng asked if this was some kind of joke. Then the guy coughed and said that he meant the super strong man who got a C. Apparently it was him, and someone previously unknown to anyone suddenly went straight to the finals, something that was only possible with a C. Mo Feng asked what he had to do with it, and he did indeed have a C grade, but he got it while fighting in close combat, so he was definitely mistaken. It couldn't be inaccurate, and so he could say with 90% certainty that he was the student from the School of Dragon Letters. And after he discovered the second passage in C, he became even more convinced of this. Then the protagonist said that this was the reason he was following him. Polo thought that he really was strong and that he had long ago realized that he was being watched. Marco Polo said that he believed in his intuition, but he knew that relying solely on it was wrong and that, as a journalist, he had to boldly assume and carefully check. Zhou Zichen is not a good fit for gender. Li William and Zhuang Da are far from being modest people and would not hide themselves. Then the only option left is that he is a hidden expert of the school who suddenly decided to shine in EM. But in that case, whether he was anonymous or not, his daily life would be profoundly affected. Mo Feng reflected on the many significant changes that had taken place at the school recently, and the fact that he had caused quite a stir with his confession to Zhou Zichen. He told Marco Polo that his story was very interesting. Then the boy laughed and told his friend that he really did have a very strong premonition and even thought it was his genetic ability, just a little out of whack. But this was offset by his high IQ, and he singled out several people, including himself. During this time, he made Li William and his friend lose face at the range, and although the shooting in the EM test was a level higher, her style was very similar to his. Mo Feng thought that he could pinpoint the essence of the matter with only a large amount of scattered information. But this guy's premonition was simply incredible. There are so many people who could contact him, and is this really true? Then the boy asked his name. The guy replied that his name was Marco Polo, and that he was a genius from the journalism department and a man destined to become famous throughout the Federation. He thought that now all he could do was wait for his confession, which could be more pleasant for a journalist. But apparently, he'll soon earn his fame. When the guy told him his name, the protagonist's expression changed and he began to recall events that happened in another life. While researching an alien race, an organization briefly emerged whose leader, he believed, was named Marco, nicknamed the one who controls the future. However, he then simply disappeared. After that, rumors spread that he was crazy and his organization had been shut down. Mo Feng clutched his heart and thought about how his scar had started to hurt again. Mo Feng told the boy that he was indeed smart and his intuitive perception was also very accurate. But now one question arose. How exactly should he get rid of the annoying witness? Marco Polo asked his brother not to do this. He could keep everything a secret and swore not to tell anyone about it, even in the next life. Mo Feng told him that he, a student of the journalism department, should know that only the dead can keep secrets, and let him see for himself that the situation here was not bad, and he would dig a hole and bury him in it. He feels like the chest pains are connected to things that could affect the future. This Marco Polo has a strong influence on the future. It's definitely something to do with the discovery of aliens, the results of Sun Xiaorui's team, and Marco's 3 reasons. He doesn't know why or how, but God still gives him some guidance and he doesn't fight alone. He asked if he still had any unfinished business and the guy grabbed his head with his hands. He said that if one day he was exposed, he could tell everyone that he was the first to know about it. The boy told his classmate that he was glad to meet him, and that his elder had to say that his skills were truly incredible. Marco Polo asked if he really wouldn't kill him now, to which the boy replied that he wasn't that stupid. While his revelation was unpleasant, it wasn't that unpleasant. Then the guy said that he'd said they were classmates from the start, so why had he bullied him then? The protagonist explained that he'd just been a little annoyed by the way he'd been showing off, and besides, he'd been following him. The boy continued to explain that if it had been a cute girl who was following him, everything could have been different. Marco Polo told his brother mentor that he was looking at a man who wanted to do great things, and that the competition this time was of unprecedented importance for both federations. Marco Polo told his brother mentor not to boast, But his premonition was incomparable and as accurate as a woman's intuition. Since childhood, he has always had a premonition of strange things, and his ability to gather information and analyze the battle situation is also at the highest level. No matter how good the results are, he can always improve them. And in this way, they will be linked, and no matter what he says in the future, he will keep everything in the strictest confidence. He can gather intelligence to locate enemies. He can do laundry and dry socks. He's simply an indispensable addition to everyday life, travel, and the tales of fire and sword. He'd been trying to figure out how to convince him to help him, but it worked out so well on its own. Mo Feng said they now had a secret that only he and he knew. He could keep it a secret for now, but this time he really intended to defeat EM and would be counting on his help. Marco Polo told his brother Mentor that he need not worry, and that he was now entirely at his disposal, and that if he said east, he would never go west. The protagonist agreed with him and said they needed to calm down, as they still had a lot of important matters to attend to. The boy said goodbye and said it was already late, and he eagerly awaited the first instructions from his mentor's brother. Mo Feng asked him to be careful on the road, and thought to himself that it seemed like fate itself was sending him strangers, and he didn't understand whether it was good or bad. When the boy came home, he noticed that his friend had put his pants on again. Meanwhile, girls were asking Zhou Zichen to confess how strong her boyfriend was. At first, they thought it was just a smoke bomb, but now it looks like there is some kind of internal story here, and let her not say that she herself doesn't know anything. Then the girl began to explain that until today she really didn't know about his talent, and simply asked him to cover for her. Her friends started talking about whether it was true or not, since she said that she didn't need such a senior student. They would take him for themselves. So it turns out Zhang Wulei and Mo Feng are also in their class. One of the girls replied that yes, but before that they were two idiots, and if they hadn't dragged them down, with Sun Xiaorui's leadership skills, their class would have long ago become one of the top 3 in the Dragon Letter School. But one of the girls remembered that only now one of them got to the qualifiers, and the other went straight to the finals. And there was some really amazing contrast here. She never thought of him and the fat man as completely hopeless and that they just weren't trying hard enough. Mo Feng thought about something truly strange. The texture of the skin in this area was completely different. It didn't look like anything he knew, but when he touched it, he felt something strange. After Marco joined, he became even more confident that the genetically modified soldiers really did have special genes. To say that the Federation had much better research in this area, but in the end it was precisely because of this instability of predictions that they had no practical effect. Since Marco could be involved in the events with the aliens, his help could very well become one of the turning points, and he decided to take him with him to the moon, in case something works out. Even if he is reborn again, he cannot say with certainty that he will be able to win the final. And that is the situation in EM this year. The abilities of the top 3 experts of the moon are simply indescribable. USAO said that they are super geniuses born from the elites of the Earth and the moon. 3 innovators who are capable of leading humanity. These 3 have proven themselves well on the battlefield against aliens, albeit only locally. In war, one individual is too insignificant, and such is reality. He fears that in his past life, even in the late stages of the war on Mars, he was unable to resist these 3. But now he finally had the opportunity to check how good these 3 really were, and the boy fell asleep. When he closed his eyes, he suddenly opened them and tried to understand what was happening. This smell was familiar. Could it really be him and this Mars? Could it really have all been a dream and he himself was still on Mars? His entire body is real, and this is the exact place where he detonated the nuclear bomb. There was even a crater left from the explosion, and why was he still alive? He was still trying to figure out what was going on and what the hell was going on. Could this really be God's entertainment, and at first he gave him hope and then took everything away? When he looked at his hand, he noticed that 3 strange scars still remained on his body. Perhaps these are hallucinations or a crossing of space or some special state. What is going on here, and why did the aliens start clearing the battlefield in front of him? He couldn't understand what had happened, and why he found himself in another dimension again. The fat man appeared in front of him and said that his clothes were not dry yet, to which the protagonist replied that everything was fine, he would wear something else. The fat man said that there was something wrong with his face and asked not to worry, because they would do a good job and it didn't matter what the results would be. Mo Feng decided when he woke up that what the aliens had just done seemed too realistic. Unfortunately, there was no more information, and at first he thought he could figure it out on his own. He told the fat man that he needed him in the final, so he definitely had to pass, and Lei replied that it would be as he said. The protagonist continued to train the fat man and hit him in the face with all his might. Lei promised to return his clothes and asked him to be gentle. He remarked that his friend had been particularly harsh today and was probably doing it on purpose. Mo Feng said he'd never do that since he'd already worn it. Lei offered to wash his socks for a whole week, but the boy refused. Lei told his friend that he'd already finished training and that he could hit him then, but he wouldn't be able to resist. Why all this Spartan training? He'd only agreed to one sparring session. Mo Feng told the fat man that he'd said they were brothers, so he wouldn't want to resort to extreme measures. Therefore, he asked that if the boy could withstand 5 minutes of his attacks, he should consider the training over. Lei replied that it was pointless for him to say anything, as he was dead tired. Then the boy laughed and said that he'd recently heard someone muttering in their sleep about liking Sun Xiaorui. I asked my dear brother not to say this and asked him what he had said before, after which I decided to agree to 5 minutes of sparring. Lei told his comrade that he must have heard something wrong and that he had already managed to warm up and get ready for the next fight. Every time he spoke with the fat man while they were on Mars, he always, intentionally or unintentionally, inquired about Sun Xiaorui's affairs. Lei had been so well informed about the news from the front lines, but when he learned that Sun Xiaorui had died in battle, he lost all motivation to live. Mo Feng told the fat man that he had to undergo his comprehensive training before the preliminaries and was obliged to make it to the finals. He didn't want to embarrass himself in front of the class president, and if he shied away, he would ask her to discipline him personally. Lei laughed and said it was easy to say, and he wondered if he really was talking in his sleep. Mo Feng replied no, but it didn't matter anymore. When the fat man heard this, he became very angry and exclaimed that he himself would beat him up today. And so the guys went through a lot of hard training and a whole week of EM qualifiers has already passed. The qualifying competition begins, and the host asked the participants to take their places quickly. The protagonist said that the qualifying round matches are not broadcast to outsiders, so he advises waiting here. Zhou Zichen thought about how she hadn't seen Mo Feng for a whole week, even though she thought that after what had happened earlier, he would start to act more actively. This week, that strange dream hasn't appeared again, and using this body is becoming more and more convenient. Especially the control over the killing aura has improved. The girl thought about how they hadn't been in touch for a whole week since joining the special training group, but now they had to devote themselves entirely to the competition. At first glance, he hasn't changed at all this week, but in fact, there have been significant changes. These changes aren't in appearance, but in character, and it's as if he's been reborn after entering EM. She thought that, although she'd heard that success made a man glow, his glow was somehow too intense. She asked the boy if they wanted more. Mo Feng replied with a smile that, barring any unexpected developments, both the fat man and the class leader would definitely be able to advance to the finals. Sun Xiaorui had done so without a problem in the past, but this time, a new variable had appeared. The fat man. The fat guy's level is really quite high. Even though this guy looks lazy, he is second to no one in mastering the curriculum. As for William and his friend, last time Zhuangzi dropped out of the qualifiers, but William passed. He doesn't know if he can do the same this time. An hour later, Li William was eliminated in the second round. This was almost at the very beginning. Why did he encounter an opponent from South America? And he was so ferocious, like some kind of barbarian. He simply dodged his attack and then easily cut him down. It's obvious there's no significant difference in strength between them, and it's all just self-delusion. When the round ended, the guys asked if Sun Xiaorui and the fat man had come out. The girl was sitting next to the main character, and Duang Ji was also sitting not far from them, being upset. William reflected that this defeat had effectively failed him in the final stage of his senior year at the academy. His assessment as a military man would be significantly lowered. And so the protagonist stood next to Zhou Zichen and prepared for the third round of the qualifying competition that had already begun. It's already the third round, and compared to Brother Feng, the fat man, and the first two opponents who were completely worthless, were happy about it. The fighting style taken from the anime looks relatively poor, but the moves that are useless against Brother Feng are quite effective in the preliminaries. Although he initially planned to lose on purpose, Brother Feng threatened him with the headman. So no matter what kind of devil emerges, he must defeat him. The virtual battlefield loading for the qualifying stage has been completed. The third round of the qualifying competition was declared to have begun, and the opponent, with his arms already crossed over his chest, was looking at the fat man. Lei was ready for the competition and raised his hands with 2 pistols in the air. Chris Thompson, a renowned expert at the Alpha Military Academy in North America, ranked in the top 59 EMs. He was an expert in close combat and prepared to confront the Fat Man in this battle. Chris Thompson was also surprised when he saw a man with just over 800 points standing in front of him. And how could he possibly make it to the third round and even have to fight him? He certainly couldn't have gotten here by luck alone. The Fat makes him look pathetic, but apparently he has a special individual ability and we need to be careful with him. The Fat Man was already prepared for battle, and with a smile on his face he held his pistols in front of him. The guy decided, looking at the situation and the enemy, that he couldn't let him get close to him. The speed of hand movement and shooting accuracy of this damn fat guy is really very rare. Chris Thompson thought that if the situation had not been so comfortable for him, he really could have finished him off right away. He was lucky that he was not moving fast enough, and he decided to take advantage of the opportune moment now. But the Fat Man saw something was wrong and started screaming. He couldn't figure out where he was throwing his knives. The guy thought that in such terrain it would be impossible to use complex burst fire techniques. Every move is a convenient opportunity for him, and if this continues, he will certainly be crushed. The boy began to think about how he should act in such a situation so that the enemy would not neutralize him. Chris Thompson, for his part, decided that a range of just over 10 meters wasn't ideal for the shooter. If his next attack failed, he could finish him off. The boy decided his victory was already too close. Lei, for his part, realized there was no turning back and he couldn't fight in close combat. The enemy decided to use a feint to force him to shoot, and realized that in this case he was caught. He decided to take his chance and decided to act right now. Suddenly he screamed. The Fat Man, watching his opponent, wishes he were as light. He jumps and leaps like that beast. The boy couldn't understand where he was hiding now and began to look around. He decided that there was nowhere to retreat and he had already reached the border of the competition zone. Suddenly his gaze changed and he realized, with his eyebrows drawn towards his nose, that he had finally found it. He asked his opponent not to think that he could hide from him behind a wall. The Fat Man began to approach him as quickly as possible and exclaimed that he could not defeat the Fat Father. The enemy did not expect such a turn of events, that he would find him so quickly and deftly and strike. As he fell to his knees, he clutched his wounded chest with his hand and called him a fat bastard. His look completely changed and, dying, he still could not understand how he could lose so quickly. He didn't expect such a turn of events and he began to be torn into small pieces. The Fat Man was very agile, and the winner of the third round of the Dragon Letter School qualifying competition was Zhang Lei. The boys were eagerly awaiting him, and the protagonist exclaimed that he was finally coming out to them. The headmistress looked at him, smiled, and asked how he was. The Fat Man grabbed his head with his hand, smiled, and said that he was lucky and that he got through. The main character immediately grabbed him and, lifting him up in his arms, exclaimed that he was simply beautiful and he knew that he could handle it. The guys around were talking about how the sun had indeed risen from the west. It seemed like anything was possible in this world, and pigs were definitely destined to learn to fly, since even a fat man could make it to the finals. Lei asked his brother to let him go because he was heavy, to which the boy replied that he really should lose weight, although he already knew that it was impossible. Zhou Zichin suggested the boys take a short break today and celebrate together. Fatso remarked that he hadn't really done anything special and had just gotten lucky. The village headman asked him not to be so conceited, and that the celebration would actually be in her honor. He smiled and replied that in that case he agreed, and for the first time in the history of their school, they had 4 finalists. In all of Asia, there are only 8, and despite the fact that they have plenty of other top-notch schools here, they have half of those students. This reform of the EM selection process proved quite effective for them. The Zhou family mansion looms before us. Mo Feng asked permission to introduce someone to his comrades and pointed out Marco Polo from the journalism department. The boy immediately greeted his classmate Zhou Zichin and said he was a huge fan. He then greeted Senior Sun Xiaorui and Senior Lei and wished them good results in the competition. The Fat Man laughed and thought that this was the first time he was called Senior Zheng, and he was very happy about it. The protagonist told Mark that although the greeting was good, he asked them to pay attention to something they didn't know. He laughed and told his boss not to worry, and that as soon as he got down to business, he'd immediately tackle the biggest challenge. This time, the competition, in addition to its traditional significance, had another special one. Zhou Zichin asked if he was sure about this and that it wasn't just gossip. Otherwise, why hadn't she heard anything about it? The girl thought he knew her capabilities. As a financial group, the Zhou family pays attention to all aspects of the news, especially those that interest them. The boys said he really intrigued them and asked what the task was. The boy thought to himself that this was exactly what he was looking for. Marco Polo began to explain that he really didn't know this and that he was a member of a hacker alliance whose specialty was creating disorderly news. But most likely there won't be any more details, since this guy just disappeared, and it's quite possible that the Yosao Special Investigation Bureau invited him for tea. The boy chuckled and thought about how, even though there had been no specifics in the news in his past life, why had the top 4 competitors never appeared in public? The protagonist asked the boy to get to the point, and he said that this time they were quite energetic and both federations were doing their best. To be more precise, they placed higher in previous competitions, and the one before that, and the one before that. But this year, due to the dominance of the 3 musketeers, the gap could become even wider. Even one of them could lead Luna to the championship, and this time there would be 3 of them. Lei asked if he couldn't come up with something better regarding the 3 minors. Then the class president explained that they were talking about swordsmen and that he watched too much anime. Artist Alan Doyle, Holy Celestial Chrissy Da Vinci, Heavenly Light Floys. Marco Polo continued to say that, in fact, little is known about them on Earth, or even on the moon itself. Alan Doyle, though you wouldn't guess it by his appearance, is so masterful in his military art that he deserves such a title. Many people suspect that he is the person who made a recording of the passage to S some time ago. And all because they both have similar styles and similar body shapes. When Marco Polo went on to say that this guy possessed incredible ranged combat skills and belonged to a special evolutionary type, he couldn't help but mention the divine abilities of the Floy's heavenly light. There's no information about him in the outside world, but on his own moon, he's a serious authority. Then the fat man asked which of them would win, Alan or Floy's. Josichin also said that at this level of strength, victory or defeat is a matter of probability, and anyone could win. But if we compare them simply, she thinks Floy's has become stronger. The protagonist wondered whether he could be called a god, and he hoped to meet him to confirm this. Marco Polo laughed and said that another popular person, the generally recognized first beauty of the moon, one might even say the princess of the moon and the heiress of the great family, the Da Vinci family, Chrissy Da Vinci. They say that photographs and videos simply cannot convey all of her beauty, and anyone who knows her character cannot resist it, and she is a goddess-level entity. Lei exclaimed that he couldn't believe it, and that he was sure that Zekin's younger sister and their headman were more beautiful than her. And those Asao of hers always loved to brag. Then the village headwoman told the fat man to think before insulting anyone. Although she hadn't seen her in person, she truly was beautiful, and in this regard the people of the moon are naturally gifted. Mo Feng remarked that there was no accounting for taste, and in the eyes of every man who loved him, his beloved seemed as beautiful as Shishu. The girl asked Mo Feng not to think he'd be able to fly after reaching the finals and to behave more decently. The fat man also said that publicly pestering the village headman was too much and he was clearly tired of life. Mo Feng asked his comrade to continue his story. Marco Polo said that these 3 are essentially the strongest and are on a completely different level from the others. The top 4 through 20 players are very strong, and the positions there are constantly changing, which means the level of the guys there is terrifying and the competition is fierce. The fighting style on the moon is not like on Earth. They fight not for points, but for the sake of fighting. So when it comes to actual fighting, it becomes even more terrifying. They will not miss out on precious opportunities, and the situation on the ground is difficult. Marco Polo told the eldest that although these words were unpleasant to hear, this was reality, and he thought that their top 10 EM already understood this. To make things look better, the military even sends soldiers of the appropriate age to participate. They have extensive combat experience, and their fighting style is very different from that of the academics. But to be honest, extensive combat experience does not necessarily mean high strength in one-on-one duels. Mo Feng thought that it was hardly such a secret. Luna most likely just didn't pay attention to it because she was confident that she would still take first place. Then the boy asked Marco Polo which of their people was the most competitive. He thought to himself that while the general level of the land left much to be desired, he honestly didn't believe they had no worthy experts. In fact, during the battles on Mars, many powerful soldiers emerged from the Earth army. And this is very strange, considering the troops that lag so far behind the moon for many years. The moon's genetic warriors are much more successful, and their training system is also superior. Earthlings, on the other hand, are usually slow to get started. Marco Polo continued to say that she should know better, since she was well acquainted with the top 10. Zhou Zichen's social standing was very different from others. It's undeniable that this is the reason she always remains in the top 10. The beautiful little Princess Zhou is well known in the capital, and Zhou Zichen is obliged to live up to all this prestige. The same people are equally prestigious in the Three Musketeers. The Moon people are naturally quite curious, and these three strongest are determined to find out who is the best. This competition finale is a public stage for the ranking of the Three Musketeers. Zhou Zichen said that on their side, there are several people who have a good chance of making it into the top 8. She named some of the strongest of their generation: Iron Man Bade, Robotech Sevilla, Blade Master Li Qiang, Shadow Sakharov, Golden Lion Da Rao. They represent their hopes of reaching the top 8. In fact, he thinks that there are still hidden experts on Earth, and who knows, maybe they will work a miracle. Zhou Zichen said that this time the selection process was optimized, but fighters who are only good at one thing will definitely not be able to make it into the top 8. They will simply come up with a suitable tactic against the expert's habits, favorite actions, and the like, which will make him completely incapable. The Luna system is much better, and it's already seen experts overwhelmed by tactics alone, leaving them no chance to take any action. Luna's fighters are truly too good at tactical execution. Mo Feng told his brothers and sisters not to be sad, as this wasn't something they should worry about. In their case, they simply needed to enjoy the competition, and now he was asking them to celebrate their victory. The head woman exclaimed that the boy had finally said something sensible and that she would not be afraid to fall for the sake of their rosy dreams. Zhou Zichen asked the fat man to say a few words, and she thought that compared to Mo Feng, he had more inner qualities. The fat man said that since pink dreams were mentioned based on his experience, it is better not to wake up and continue sleeping.